You're listening to the Alpha's love stories, romantic audiobooks that will make your heart race. Don't forget to subscribe for more enchanting love tales. Chapter 1: The Weight of a Crown and a Crumbling Kingdom. The silence in the throne room of Valdoria was not peaceful. It was a thick, heavy quiet, like the air before a shattering storm. It was a silence that pressed against the ears and settled like stone dust in the lungs. And in the center of that immense, echoing space, on a throne carved from a single block of night-black obsidian, sat the man who should have commanded all the sound in the world, King Alistair, Alpha Sovereign of the 7 United Shifter Packs. His body was utterly still, a statue of regal power, but his mind was a battlefield. 8 years, 8 long, grinding, desperate years since he had taken this crown from the cold brow of his dying father. A father who had ruled with a fist of iron, who had built this kingdom on fear and fractured its unity with suspicion. Alistair had sworn to be different. He had pledged his life, his soul, to binding up the wounds, to rebuilding the trust, to being a king of the people, not just over them. And for 8 years he had truly believed he was succeeding. The proof of his failure lay across his knees. A single sheet of parchment, humble and unadorned. It had arrived not by royal courier but slipped under his chamber door in the dead of night, a ghost of accusation. He had read it once, then twice, then a dozen times, until the words were etched behind his eyes, flashing in the dark when he tried to sleep. To the king who does not see, your capital pack is sick. The rot starts in the treasury and spreads through the streets like a plague. Omegas are not citizens, they are currency. Their debts are fabricated, their labor is stolen, their children are taken as surety. Last moon, old man Haggard died in the stocks for a debt of 3 copper coins he had already paid. His daughter, Liana, was sold to a merchant from the southern pass to clear the remaining balance. She screamed your name as they dragged her away. Do you hear her, your majesty, or do you only hear the lies your beta counselor whispers in your ear? It was not the first anonymous complaint, but it was the first that named names, that cited specific dates, that spoke with the raw, bleeding truth of first-hand witness. It was not the rant of a malcontent, it was the testimony of a dying man. A low growl vibrated in Alistair's chest, a sound so deep it was felt more than heard. His wolf, a mighty, restless spirit named Valerius, raged against the confines of his human form. Betrayal. Deception. Our people are suffering, and we sat here in silence. The king's hands, strong and scarred from years of training and battle, clenched on the arms of the throne. His knuckles were white moons against his skin. He could not dismiss this, he would not. The great doors of the throne room swung inward with a soft, ominous groan. The man who entered moved with a silent, oiled grace that spoke of supreme confidence. Beta Counselor Silas. He was a portrait of dignified loyalty, his hair more silver than black now, his beard meticulously groomed, his robes of office deep burgundy edged with gold thread falling in perfect lines. He had served Alistair's father for 20 years and Alistair himself for 8. He was the steady hand, the voice of experience, the keeper of the kingdom's complex machinery. My king, Silas said, his voice a warm, resonant baritone that filled the space. He bowed, the motion fluid and respectful. You called for me. Alistair did not speak, he did not move. He simply lifted the parchment from his lap and held it out, his storm-gray eyes, the color of a winter sky at twilight, locked onto Silas's face. He watched for the blink, the twitch, the slight tightening of the lips. He was a hunter in that moment, and the prey was the truth. Silas took the letter. His expression was one of polite curiosity as he read, then a transformation. His brows drew together in a frown of profound concern. A sigh, heavy with world-weary patience, escaped him. He finished reading and handed the parchment back as if it were something slightly unclean. Ah, my lord, he said, his voice laced with a sorrowful disappointment. Again, the shadows are speaking their poison, I see. This is the work of those who resent the natural order, who wish to thrive without contributing. They spin tales to weaken the pack's foundations, to turn the weak against the strong. You must not let this distress you. I oversee these matters personally. The taxes are fair, the laws are just, and the omegas are cared for, appropriately given their station. There it was, that word, appropriately. It was a cage of a word hiding a multitude of sins. Alistair's voice, when it finally came, was deceptively soft, a blade sheathed in velvet. Define appropriately for me, Silas, in detail. A flicker, so fast Alistair almost missed it. A flash of something cold and sharp in the depths of Silas's brown eyes. It was gone in an instant, replaced by practiced reason. They are fed, they are housed, they perform duties suited to their abilities and rank, they contribute to the whole and the whole provides for them. It is the balance of the pack, my king, the ancient balance. What more could they possibly require? What more? The king's heart screamed the answer. Dignity, respect, safety from predators wearing the faces of their protectors, a future that is not a slow descent into despair. The force of his own fury threatened to crack his calm facade. He felt Valerius snarling, clawing to be free to tear and rend, but a king could not act on fury alone. He needed proof, he needed to see with his own eyes. And he knew with a cold, sinking certainty that if he walked out the gates as King Alistair, he would see nothing but a carefully staged play. He let the silence stretch, letting the weight of his gaze press down on Sela's. Then slowly, deliberately, he nodded. He folded the letter with immense care and tucked it into the inner pocket of his royal tunic, placing it directly over his heart. A promise, a vow. I see, Alistair said, his tone now flat, unreadable. Thank you for your clarifying counsel, you may go. Sela's bowed again, deeper this time. As you wish, my king. My only aim is to serve the realm and lighten your burdens. He turned and walked back toward the doors, his footsteps echoing with finality. When the doors thudded shut, leaving Alistair once more in that oppressive silence, he finally moved. He surged to his feet, a wave of contained power. He paced before the throne, the movements of a caged predator. The words of the letter burned. Lyanna, Hagar, sold, stocks. He had been a fool, a trusting, idealistic fool. He had surrounded himself with his father's old court, believing their experience was an asset. Instead, they had been a wall, shielding him from the rot they cultivated. Sela's was not just hiding the truth, he was the architect of the lie. An idea, dangerous and dark, took root. To find a sickness, a physician must sometimes become invisible to the microbes. To find the truth in his kingdom, the king must cease to exist. He would leave the castle tonight, he would become a ghost. He would shed his fine clothes, his royal scent, his commanding aura. He would become nothing, a beggar, a nameless, faceless wanderer with empty pockets and hungry eyes. Only then would the masks slip. Only then would the whispers become shouts he could hear. His decision crystallized into a cold, hard resolve. He would call this mission the Veil. He would walk unseen among his people. He would witness their suffering firsthand. And when he had gathered the evidence, when he had seen the depth of the betrayal, he would return, not as a beggar but as a king, and justice would fall like a hammer. Far from the cold, stone heart of the castle, where the pack lands frayed into wild forest, the night was not silent either. But here, the sounds were of scraping wood, of a cough from a cramped bed, of the relentless, whispering stream. Ilara's world was defined by cold water and aching muscles. She knelt on the muddy bank, the icy spring current gnawing at her hands until they were raw, red, and split. Before her lay a mountain of soiled linen and wool, the laundry of the castle's nobility. Each shirt, each tunic, each dress was a saga of sweat and perfume and privilege, ground into the fabric. Her task was to erase those sagas, to return them spotless. For this, she would receive a handful of root vegetables and some stale bread. Maybe. The moon was a pale, cold coin above her, offering no warmth. 5 years since her world had ended. She had been 19, her brother Kieran 11 when the rogue wolves came. They came at dusk, shadows with teeth. Her father, a gifted tracker, and her mother, a fierce warrior, had held the door of their small, happy home, buying seconds with their lives. Ilara had shoved a weeping Kieran into the hidden root cellar, piling sacks of grain over the hatch before climbing in after him. They had huddled in the dark, listening to the sounds of the end of their world, snarls, screams, then a silence more terrible than any noise. The pack had buried her parents with minimal ceremony. No one offered to take in the orphaned Omega girl and her void brother, a child who mysteriously had never manifested a wolf. At 19, Ilara became mother, father, and provider. Then 2 years later, her own wolf had emerged, late, so painfully late. In a society where shifting at 12 or 13 was the norm, a first shift at 21 was a mark of profound weakness, a defect. The pack's pity evaporated. She and Kieran were now twin burdens, a void and a weakling, and Beta Counselor Sela's had come. He stood in the doorway of the drafty hut they had been moved to, a ledger in his hands. His voice was devoid of malice, which made it all the more terrifying. It was simply business. The expenses incurred by your family's situation have been tallied, he had said, his eyes on the page, not on her. the burial rites, the patrols dispatched to hunt the rogues, the loss of your father's hunting contributions. The total debt to the pack is 12 silver coins. You will remit 2 silver each month until it is cleared. Ilara had stared, her mouth dry. 2 silver, but how? I receive no coins, only food for my work. Silas had looked up then, and his eyes were like polished stones. That is not the pack's concern. If the debt is not serviced, you and the Void will be expelled from protected territory. I doubt you would last a week beyond the border. The threat was absolute, so she worked. By day, she washed clothes in the stream until her back screamed and her hands bled. By night, she cleaned the castle stables, mucking filth and hauling hay for the noblemen's horses, creatures who ate better than she did. For this double labor, she received 1 small loaf of bread per week from the stable master, 1 loaf to split between 2 growing people. She developed a system. She would give Kieran 3/4 of the bread, the few vegetables she got from the laundry mistress. She would tell him, with a smile that felt like broken glass, that she ate well at the castle. He was smart, her brother. He knew things were bad. But he wanted to believe her, needed to believe her, so he did. The guilt of lying to him was a constant, dull ache in her chest, right beside the hunger. Ilara, his voice now at 16 was deeper, but it still held that childlike worry for her. He stood in the doorway of their hut, a silhouette against the faint firelight within. You've been out there for hours. Come in, please. Just the last few, Kieran, she called back, forcing a bright tone into her voice. It came out strained and brittle. Go back to the fire, I'll be in soon. She heard him hesitate, then the soft shuffle as he retreated. Her shoulders slumped the moment he was gone. She finished the final tunic, wringing it out with a strength born of pure desperation. Her basket was now impossibly heavy. She hauled it back to the hut, her muscles trembling. Inside, the hut was bare. A hearth, 2 cots, a rough table. Kieran sat by the weak fire, mending a torn blanket. His face, so like their father's, was pale and too thin. He looked up, and his eyes, the same warm hazel as their mother's, filled with an anguish that belied his years. You're freezing, he whispered. I'm all right, she said, setting the basket down. She pulled the meager payment from her apron, 3 wizened turnips, a soft potato, the heel of hard bread. She placed them on the table. For you, I'll take my supper at the castle later. Ilara, stop, he said, his voice cracking. Stop lying to me. I'm not a child anymore. I see how thin you are. I see your hands. The directness stunned her. The fragile pretense shattered between them. She sank onto a stool, the fight draining out of her. What choice do we have, Kieran? She asked, not looking at him. If I don't work, we starve. If I don't lie, you lose hope, and hope is all we have left. Then let me help, he pleaded, standing up. Let me find work, anything, and have them throw rocks at you, call you names, use you for sport. Her head snapped up, her green eyes flashing with a protective fury. No, my job is to keep you safe. That is the only thing that matters. This is not your fault. It will never be your fault. She stood, cutting off the argument. I have to deliver this laundry, then the stables. There will be bread tonight, real bread, we will be okay. She left before he could see the tears in her eyes. The walk to the castle was a gauntlet of averted gazes and muttered insults. She was invisible, or worse, a stain to be avoided. She delivered the laundry, enduring the laundry mistress's scorn over an imaginary stain, receiving even less food than promised. The hours blurred into a nightmare of scrubbing, hauling, bowing. Finally, near midnight, exhausted to the point of swaying on her feet, she stood before the stablemaster. He eyed her with disdain, then tossed a small, dense loaf of brown bread onto the filthy straw at her feet. Don't linger. She picked it up as if it were a holy relic. This, with the turnips, would keep Kieran fed for days. She tucked it into her apron and stumbled out into the courtyard. The castle loomed above her, a monolith of shadow and indifference. The weight of it all, the debt, the hunger, the fear, the relentless, grinding exhaustion, crushed down upon her. She stopped, leaning against the cold stone wall, and let the despair wash over her, just for a moment, just one moment where she didn't have to be strong. She did not see the pair of eyes watching her from the high ramparts. King Alistair, already planning his descent into the streets, saw the small, battered figure below. He saw her stumble. He saw her pause, her head bowing as if under a physical weight. He saw the way she clutched her apron, protecting the meager prize within. A strange, sharp pang, something that felt uncomfortably like shame, lanced through him. That was one of his people. That was the result of his reign. That was the truth Silas had hidden. His jaw tightened. Tomorrow. Tomorrow the veil would begin. Ilara, feeling a sudden, eerie prickle on the back of her neck, straightened up and looked around the dark courtyard. She saw nothing, just shadows. But the feeling of being watched, of a looming, unseen threat, clung to her as she began the long, lonely walk home. The bread in her apron felt less like hope and more like a last supper. A storm was coming. She could feel it in her bones. And she had nowhere left to hide. Chapter 2, The Veil of a King and the Eyes of the Lost Dawn over Valdoria was a pale, hesitant thing, the color of a faded bruise. King Alastair stood at the forest's edge, a stone's throw from the main gates of the capital city, Silverhold. The man who looked back at him from the still surface of a rain barrel was a stranger. Gone were the royal garments, the aura of command that made wolves bow without a word. In their place was a wraith. Dirt, artfully applied, smudged his strong jaw and matted his dark hair into unruly knots. His clothes were rags, a tunic torn at the shoulder, trousers worn thin at the knees, a cloak so threadbare it was more suggestion than shelter. They hung loose on his frame, disguising the powerful musculature of an alpha, but the greatest change was internal. With a focus that made his temples throb, Alastair pushed his alpha aura down, compressing the mighty presence of Valerius into a tiny, hidden ember deep within his soul. The sensation was profoundly unsettling. It felt like holding his breath indefinitely, like being stripped of a vital sense. He felt hollow, vulnerable, invisible. This was the veil, and it was time to walk through it. He shuffled toward the main gates as the city stirred to life. The guards on duty, usually so rigidly alert for their king, didn't spare the ragged beggar a second glance. One even wrinkled his nose and gestured with his spear. "Keep moving, vagrant, no loitering." Alastair ducked his head, muttering a hoarse, "Aye, sir," and slipped inside the walls of his own capital. The marketplace was a symphony of smells and sounds, baking bread, roasting meat, the tang of spices, the cries of vendors. Wealthy merchants and low-ranking nobles moved through the throng, their clothes fine, their expressions placid. It was a picture of prosperity. For a heartbeat, Alastair felt a flicker of doubt. Had the letter been an exaggeration? Then he saw the line. It was tucked in the shadow of the granary, away from the main square's vibrant chaos. A line of Omegas, a dozen or so, their postures speaking volumes of defeat. Heads bowed, shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on the ground. They waited in a silence that was heavier than the market's noise. Before them stood two pack guards, one with a ledger, the other with a coin box and a cruel, bored expression. Alastair shuffled closer, finding a shadowed niche between two stalls where he could watch, unmoving as a stone. Liana of the Western Quarter, the guard with the ledger, barked. A young woman, painfully thin, stepped forward. Her hands trembled as she offered a small leather pouch. The guard emptied it into his palm. 3 silver this month's levy, he counted, his lip curled. "This is 2 silver and 8 copper, where's the rest?" "Please," Liana whispered, the name from the letter making Alastair's blood run cold. "My father, he was ill before he. I had to buy medicine, I will have it next week, I swear on the moon goddess." "The levy is due today," the guard interrupted, his voice flat. He nodded to his companion, who stepped forward and grabbed Liana's arm. "Wait." Another Omega, older, her face a map of hard years, stepped out of line. "I have it, I have her silver." She pressed a coin into the guard's hand. The guard holding Liana shoved her back into line with a grunt, pocketing both coins without notation. Alastair watched, a cold fury settling in his gut. This was the machinery of the lie, the arbitrary sum, the public humiliation, the predatory enforcement. He watched as an elderly Omega was charged a late fee for an illness that had kept him abed. He watched a mother with 2 clinging children surrender her last coins while her children whimpered with hunger. Then a pregnant Omega reached the front. She was round with child, her face drawn with exhaustion. She offered her payment. The guard counted it and smirked. "This is last month's payment." "You still owe for this month." "I paid last month," she protested, a spark of defiance in her eyes. "You marked your book, I saw you." The guard's expression darkened. "Are you calling me a liar?" His voice rose, drawing glances from the marketplace. "Are you accusing a pack official of falsifying records?" The Omega shrank back. "I only meant, seize her." The second guard grabbed her arm, hauling her away from the line. She cried out, stumbling, her free hand flying to her rounded belly. "My baby. Please have mercy, should have thought of that before you tried to cheat the pack," the ledger guard said coldly. He made a mark in his book. 7 days in the public stocks, that will remind you of your obligations." Her sobs echoed as she was dragged away. The remaining Omegas in line did not look up. The merchants in the square averted their eyes, suddenly engrossed in their wares. A noblewoman tutted softly to her companion, "See what comes of sloth and dishonesty." Alistair's hands clenched into fists so tight his nails bit into his palms. He wanted to roar, he wanted to shift and tear the guards limb from limb. Valerius howled inside the prison of his mind, but the veil held. He was a beggar, he was powerless. He could only watch and remember. He spent the day as a ghost in his own city. He shuffled past bakeries where the smell of fresh bread was a physical torture. He sat in alleys where shopkeepers threw spoiled fruit at him to drive him off. He was cursed, spat upon, kicked. Not a single soul offered a crumb of bread or a cup of water. The compassion of his pack, the unity he had worked to build, was a fairy tale. In its place was a hard, selfish stratification where weakness was a sin and mercy was extinct. As twilight bled into proper night, cold and damp, Alistair found himself back near the castle walls, drawn to the stables as if by some faint, desperate hope. His body ached with a genuine, bone-deep weariness. The strain of suppressing his aura was a constant drain. He had eaten nothing, drunk nothing. The performance was becoming dangerously real. He sank into a dark alcove where the stable wall met the outer curtain wall, a spot sheltered from the wind. Letting his head loll against the cold stone, he closed his eyes. He wasn't sleeping. A king could never fully sleep in enemy territory, but he let his body go slack, the perfect picture of a man broken by the world. Time passed. The castle's noises faded to night sounds, the call of the watch, the distant howl of a wolf on patrol, the rustle of the stable's occupants. Then a new sound, light, quick footsteps dragging with exhaustion, someone leaving the stables after a late shift. The footsteps slowed, stopped. A soft intake of breath. Oh no, the voice was feminine, young, and laced with a concern so immediate and genuine it struck Alistair like a physical blow. No one had spoken with that tone in his presence all day. Gentle hands touched his shoulder. "Sir. Can you hear me?" He let his eyelids flutter open, affecting the bleary confusion of the newly awakened. The woman kneeling beside him was haloed by the faint light from a stable lantern. Chestnut hair escaped a rough braid, framing a face that was all sharp angles and shadows, the face of someone who knew hunger intimately. But her eyes were the green of deep forest pools, and in them swam a worry so profound it made his chest ache. "You're awake," she said, and a visible wave of relief washed over her features. She reached for a waterskin at her hip. "Here, drink slowly, you're parched." The water was warm and tasted of leather, but it was the most precious thing he'd been offered in a day of plenty. He drank in small sips as she instructed, her hand steadying the skin. Her touch was careful, calloused but not rough. "When did you last eat?" she asked, her gaze scanning his dirt-streaked face. "Yesterday," Alistair rasped, the lie tasting like ash. "I had a feast this morning before I became this." Her expression tightened, a flicker of pain crossing her features as if his hunger were her own. She glanced around, a quick, nervous gesture, then reached into the folds of her worn apron. She pulled out a small loaf of bread. It was the only thing she had. He could see the empty pouch, the lack of any other bundle. This was not a snack, this was her sustenance. "Here," she said, and broke the loaf in two, not equally. She gave him the clearly larger portion. "It's not much, but it will help." Alistair stared at the bread, then at her face. In the lamplight he could see the hollows under her eyes, the sharp line of her collarbone above her patched dress. She was starving, actively, undoubtedly starving, and she was giving him her food. His control over his aura slipped for a terrifying second. A wave of something, recognition, shock, a deep primal pull threatened to break through the veil. Her scent hit him, not the typical omega sweetness of honey or vanilla, but something clean and wild. Snow and pine and cold, clear water. It was unique. It was arresting. "I can't take this," he heard himself say, his voice rough with more than disguise. "You need it more than I do." She offered a smile, and it transformed her weary face, lighting it with a stubborn, beautiful kindness. "I've already eaten today. Please take it." The lie was so transparent, so bravely offered, that it stole his breath. Here, in the heart of his corrupted kingdom, was a selfless heart, a royal omega offering her last crust to a beggar king. He took the bread. "What's your name?" "Ilara." She settled back on her heels, watching him. "What's yours?" "Thuron," he said, the old, common name feeling foreign on his tongue. "Well, Thuron, you picked a dangerous place to rest. The guards make rounds." "If they find you here," she trailed off, the unspoken consequence hanging in the air. "Come, there's a corner in the stables, behind the hay bales. It's dry and the horses give off warmth. If you're quiet and gone before first light, you'll be safe. Why? The question was out before he could stop it, raw and real. Why would you help me? You don't know me, I could be anyone. Ilara looked at him for a long moment, and in her forest-green eyes he saw a depth of sadness that belonged to someone twice her age. Because everyone deserves a little kindness, she said, her voice barely a whisper, especially those the world has forgotten. She stood and offered her hand. He took it, noting the strength in her grip despite her frailty. She led him into the warm, hay-scented darkness of the stable, past the drowsing horses, to a hidden nook created by stacked bales. Stay behind these if you hear anyone. And please be gone by dawn. She turned to leave. Where are you going? He asked. Home, my brother is waiting. The protective warmth in those two words, my brother, told him everything. This was who she fought for. This was why she was here, working herself to bone. Ilara paused at the stable door, looking back. Thuron, if you're still here tomorrow, I'll bring food, not much but something. You don't have to, I know. That smile again, sad and genuine, but I will. And she was gone, melting into the night. Alistair sat in the fragrant darkness, the half-loaf of bread in his hand, feeling heavier than his crown ever had. Valerius was quiet now, not raging but contemplative. A strange, unfamiliar warmth spread through Alistair's chest, battling the cold fury of the day's discoveries. He thought of the pregnant Omega dragged to the stocks, of Silas's smooth lies, of the system that allowed such cruelty, and he thought of Ilara, starving but sharing, beaten down but not broken. A flicker of pure, undiluted light in the overwhelming darkness. Tomorrow he would dig deeper into the corruption. He would follow the guards, find the records, uncover the full, rotten truth. But tonight, in this humble stable, with a gift he could never repay, King Alistair made a silent, solemn vow. He would tear this corrupt system apart with his bare hands. And he would make sure Ilara, and every soul like her, never had to share their last crust of bread again. A new, dangerous thought whispered in his mind. One that had nothing to do with kings and justice, and everything to do with forest-green eyes and the scent of snow. What if the veil wasn't just a disguise? What if, for the first time in 8 years, someone was seeing the real man beneath the crown? The night deepened around him, full of shadows, secrets, and the fragile, terrifying beginning of something new. Chapter 3, Threads of Corruption and Crumbs of Hope. The next 3 days blurred into a grim, relentless tapestry for the man who had been King Alistair. By day, Thuron the beggar haunted Silverhold streets. He perfected the art of invisibility, a slumped posture, a shuffling gait, eyes perpetually downcast. His silence was his greatest tool. People talked freely around those they deemed beneath notice, and Thuron heard everything. The marketplace whispers became a chorus of corruption. On the first afternoon, he followed 2 guards from the tax line. They led him to a disused warehouse near the river docks. Through a splintered board, he watched a scene of casual betrayal. A burly guard, Garvin, unlocked a strongbox overflowing with silver coins. He divided the haul into 3 neat piles. 2 smaller piles were swept into the guard's own pouches with practiced ease. The largest pile was counted meticulously into a smaller, iron-bound chest. With a flourish, Garvin pressed a wax seal onto its lock. Even from a distance, Alistair recognized the insignia, a serpent coiled around a staff, the personal seal of Beta Counselor Silas. 20 Omegas processed this week, Garvin grunted to his companion, a wiry man named Foss. 4 ran, Silas wants them found, can't have the livestock thinking they can wander off. Foss chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. The wilderness will claim them if the rogues don't, saves us the trouble. They laughed, sharing a flask as they left. Alistair memorized their faces, the warehouse location, the rhythm of their crime. Each detail was a stone in the foundation of the case he was building, a case that would one day crush them all. The second day brought him to a narrow alley in the Weavers' district. A commotion drew him, the desperate wail of a child. A young Omega mother, clutching a toddler to her chest, was being pried from her doorway by 2 guards. The dead is clear, I have witnesses, she screamed, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. Witnesses to your lies, a guard sneered, his grip iron. He wrenched the sobbing child from her arms and thrust the boy at a horrified neighbor. Hold this, its mother has accounts to settle. They dragged her away, her screams echoing off the close walls until they faded into the city's hum. Alistair's wolf, Valerius, thrashed against his mental chains. The urge to intervene was a physical pain, but the veil held. He clenched his jaw until it ached, adding the mother's face, the child's cries, to the ledger of guilt in his mind. But the nights were a different world. Each evening, as the castle sank into quiet, Alara would come to the stables. She always brought something, a withered apple, a chunk of hard cheese wrapped in cloth, a piece of coarse brown bread. It was never enough, but it was everything she had. They spoke in hushed tones, their conversations islands of fragile peace in a sea of despair. "You're still here," she'd said on the second night, settling wearily into the hay beside him. She handed him half a wrinkled carrot. "You told me I could stay," Thuron replied, his voice maintaining its practiced hoarseness. "Most don't," she said softly, gazing at the stable wall as if seeing something far away. "They fear the master's temper or the guards." She hesitated. "My brother, Kieran, he worries for me. He doesn't like me coming here after dark. He's wise to worry. This city is not kind." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "No, it is." She fell silent for a moment. "What was your life like, Thuron, before?" He spun the tale he'd prepared. A farmer from the eastern valleys, land gone to dust, family lost to fever, a slow trek west that led only to more hardship. He painted pictures of harvest festivals and communal barn raisings, of a life where neighbors were family. Alara listened, her eyes closed, absorbing the story like sunlight. When he described a particularly ridiculous incident involving an escaped goat and a village elder's prized herb garden, a sound escaped her, a genuine, startled laugh. It was clear and bright like water over stones, and it seemed to shock her as much as it did him. Alastair froze. The sound went through him, piercing the veil, striking the man beneath. Valeria stirred with a low, approving rumble. Her scent, snow and pine, seemed to intensify, wrapping around him. It was more than unique. It called to him on a level he couldn't name, a deep, instinctual pull that threatened his careful control. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide as if she'd committed a crime. I forgot what that felt like." "Don't be sorry," he said, his own voice softer than he intended. "You should laugh more often." Her smile was bittersweet. "Maybe when Kieran and I are free." A shadow crossed her face. "Someday we'll leave Silverhold, find a pack that sees people, not categories, where Kieran can be more than a void, where I can work and actually keep what I earn." The fierceness in her whisper was a testament to her spirit. "That's the dream that keeps me putting one foot in front of the other." "It's a good dream," Thuron said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. But the fragile peace of the nights was shattered on the third day. The corruption had a name, and it was closing in on her. Alastair had positioned himself near the castle's kitchen midden, a perfect vantage point to watch the servants' entrance. Through the open doorway he saw Alara, sleeves rolled up, scrubbing a massive cast-iron pot. Her arms were submerged to the elbow in grey, soapy water. Then Silas arrived. The beta counselor moved through the kitchen like a lord inspecting his estate. He questioned the head cook about supplies, tasted a sauce, his expression one of detached scrutiny. Then his gaze landed on Alara. He stopped. "You, Omega, what is your name?" Alara's head snapped up. She wiped her hands quickly on her apron, bowing her head. "Alara, my lord." "Alara," Silas rolled the name on his tongue as if tasting it. "The one with the defective sibling." "Yes." He pulled a small ledger from his robe. "There is a discrepancy. 2 loaves of bread are missing from yesterday's kitchen count." The head cook, a plump woman named Marin, stepped forward, wringing her hands. "My lord, the count must be wrong. I did not ask you," Silas said, his voice cutting through the kitchen's chatter like a blade. All sound ceased. He focused on Alara. "Well." Alara had gone pale as milk. "My lord, I have taken nothing. I swear it on my brother's life. Guards found bread crumbs in the servants' corridor, near the alcove where you are known to rest." Silas produced a scrap of linen, unfolding it to reveal a few meager crumbs. "Do you deny this evidence?" Alastair's blood turned to ice. It was a trap. The crumbs were likely from Alara's own rations or planted. She was being targeted. Those are from my own bread," she stammered, her voice trembling. "The laundry mistress can tell you what she pays me." "The laundry mistress reports," Silas interrupted, his voice rising to fill the kitchen, "that you have been taking food meant for working pack members and giving it to vagrants. You steal from the productive to feed the worthless." The blow landed. Alastair saw the realization dawn in Alara's eyes, horror, understanding, betrayal. Someone had seen her feeding Thuron. Someone had told Silas. "My lord, I only shared what was mine. What is yours is determined by the pack," Silas stated, closing the ledger with a definitive snap. "Your monthly debt obligation is hereby doubled. 4 silver coins, do now." A gasp rippled through the watching servants. 4 silver was an impossible, monstrous sum. Ilara swayed, her hand flying to the wash tub for support. 4 silver. My lord, please, I cannot. In 3 lifetimes I could not earn that. Then you have 3 days, Silas said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. 3 days to produce the payment. If you cannot, you and the void will be expelled from pact territory. Consider it an incentive to productivity. He turned on his heel and left, leaving a silence heavier than stone. Ilara stood frozen, tears now streaming silently down her face, mingling with the soap suds on her arms. No one moved to comfort her. No one met her eyes. Alistair, hidden in the shadows, felt a rage so pure and white-hot it threatened to incinerate the veil on the spot. His vision tinged with red. Valerius was a roaring tempest within. He dares threaten her. Our mate. The unbidden thought shocked him, but it felt fundamentally true. He had to wait just a little longer. The evidence was almost complete, but watching Ilara world shatter, knowing he was the cause, it was the hardest command he had ever given himself. That night, Ilara came to the stables very late. Her footsteps were slow, dragging. She didn't speak. She simply collapsed into the hay beside him, her body shuddering with silent, shuddering sobs. Thuron didn't know what to say. Words were worthless against such a calculated evil, so he did the only thing he could. He shifted closer, offering the solid, silent presence of another human being. Ilara turned into him instinctively, pressing her face against his ragged tunic as if it could shield her from the world, her hands fisted in the fabric, holding on as if she were drowning. I don't know what to do, the words finally spilled out, choked and broken. 4 silver, it's a death sentence, but if we run, Kieran has no wolf, the rogues, they'll tear him apart, there is no path, there is no way out. We'll find one, Thuron whispered, the promise hollow even to his own ears. There is none, she said, her voice emptying of all hope. This is how it ends, I always knew it would, I wanted more time for him. She cried until there were no tears left, until exhaustion claimed her and her breathing evened into the shallow rhythm of troubled sleep. Alistair held her, feeling the fragile weight of her in his arms, the steady beat of her heart against his chest. Her scent enveloped him, snow and pine and salt tears. Valerius was quiet now, not raging but settled into a fierce, protective certainty. Ours to shield, to keep. He looked down at her face, peaceful in sleep but marked by trails of dried tears. The ember of warmth she had kindled in him blazed into a bonfire of resolve. The investigation was over. He had seen enough. He knew the players, the patterns, the rotten core. Tomorrow, Thuron the beggar would vanish. Tomorrow, King Alistair would return. And Beta Counselor Silas and every wolf who had enabled him would learn what happened when an Alpha King's justice finally awoke. He pressed his lips to Ilara's hair in a feather-light, unseen kiss. A promise. Sleep, he murmured into the dark. Tomorrow, everything changes. But as he held her, a cold thread of fear wove through his resolve. When he revealed himself, when the king replaced the beggar, would she ever look at him with those trusting, forest-green eyes again? Or would the man she had shared her crumbs with be lost to her forever, just another lie in a world full of them? The question hung in the hay-scented air, unanswered as the castle slept on, oblivious to the earthquake gathering in its heart. Chapter 4, The Mask Shatters. Dawn arrived not with gentle light, but with the grim, gray clarity of a drawn blade. In his hidden corner of the stable, Alistair shed the persona of Thuron like a second skin. The dirt was scrubbed away with handfuls of clean straw and water from the horse trough. The ragged clothes were discarded, replaced by the simple, dark garments he had concealed in a saddlebag days before, clothes fit for a noble but not a king. The final, most crucial transformation was internal. He stopped fighting, stopped compressing. He let the dam break. His alpha aura, suppressed for 3 agonizing days, unfurled. It wasn't a trickle, it was a tidal wave. Power radiated from him, invisible but palpable, a pressure that made the nearby horses stamp and snort in their stalls, their eyes rolling white. The very air in the stable seemed to thicken, charged with dominance. Valerius stretched within him, a massive, shadowy presence finally free after a long confinement. Alistair stood tall, his shoulders squaring, his spine straightening. The slump of the beggar was gone. In its place was the unyielding posture of a sovereign. His storm-gray eyes, once dull with pretended defeat, now glinted with cold, focused fury. The veil was lifted. The king had returned. He moved through the silent castle corridors not with a beggar's shuffle, but with the silent, predatory grace of his wolf. Servants, just beginning their morning duties, stumbled back as he passed, bowing instinctively under the weight of his presence, their faces etched with confusion. He looked like a lord, but he felt like more. He went directly to the chambers of Captain Rylan, commander of the Royal Guard, a man whose loyalty had been proven in a dozen border skirmishes. Alistair did not knock, he opened the door. Rylan was midway through buckling his breastplate. He took one look at Alistair's face, at the raw authority pouring off him, and dropped to one knee without a word. "Rise," Alistair commanded, his voice the low rumble of gathering thunder. "Listen closely. You are to take 10 of your most trusted men whose families are here in Silverhold, men who have never taken a bribe. You will go to the Old River warehouse. You will arrest guards Garvin and Foss. You will secure an iron-bound chest bearing Councillor Silas's seal. You will do this quietly, and you will bring them and the chest directly to the dungeons. No one else is to know. Is that clear?" Ryland's eyes were wide, but he nodded sharply. "Perfectly, my king. Go now." As Ryland hurried out, buckling his sword belt, Alistair turned to the castle steward. "Sound the assembly horn. Every adult member of the capital pack is to gather in the main courtyard in 1 hour. No exceptions. If they are breathing, they are to be there." The steward paled but ran to obey. The hour that followed was a controlled tempest. Alistair retreated to his war room, pulling out maps and ledgers, the real ones, not the falsified copies Silas had presented. He cross-referenced names from the anonymous letter with tax records, with census rolls. The pattern was horrifyingly clear. The debts always appeared after an Omega showed resilience or had a valuable skill, or in Alara's case asked too many questions. It was a system of control, of crushing potential, of harvesting desperation. His mind kept returning to her, Alara. Would she be in the courtyard? Would she hear the horn and come, confused and frightened? The thought of her face when she saw him, it was the one uncertainty in his perfectly calculated plan, a vulnerable spot in his armor. When the deep, booming note of the assembly horn shuddered through the stones of Silverhold, Alistair made his way to the royal chambers. He did not don his full ceremonial regalia. Instead, he chose the battle armor of an alpha, polished steel pauldrons, a breastplate engraved with the crest of Valdoria, a cloak of midnight blue. This was not a celebration. This was a reckoning. The main courtyard was a sea of murmuring confusion. Hundreds of wolves packed the space, from the highest nobles in silks to the lowest laborers in homespun. The air buzzed with speculation. An emergency assembly, an attack, a royal proclamation. Alistair took his position on the high reviewing platform, his guards forming a stern line behind him. His gaze swept the crowd, searching, and there near the back, pressed against a wall as if trying to vanish into it, he saw her. Alara. She was still in her drab servant's dress, her face pale, her eyes wide with the same fear she'd carried since Silas's threat. Kieran stood protectively beside her, glancing around with nervous suspicion. A different kind of pain lanced through Alistair. Soon, he thought, soon the fear ends. His eyes continued their scan and found Silas. The beta counselor stood near the front, his expression one of polite, puzzled concern, the perfect picture of a loyal advisor wondering what crisis required such drama. The murmuring died as Alistair raised a hand. The silence that fell was absolute, strained. "People of Valdoria," his voice rang out, clear and hard, carrying to the furthest corners of the yard. "For 3 days I have not been your king." A ripple of shock went through the crowd. Silas's polite mask slipped for a second, revealing utter bewilderment. "For 3 days," Alistair continued, his gaze nailing Silas to the spot, "I walked among you, not as Alistair, but as a beggar, a broken, hungry, forgotten man. I walked your streets. I sat in your alleys. I witnessed the true heart of this pack." He let the words hang, let the dread build. "And what I witnessed was treason." Now the crowd stirred, a wave of unease. Silas's face had gone carefully blank. "I witnessed a system of exploitation designed to prey upon the weakest among us." Alistair's voice rose, fueled by the memories, the pregnant Omega, the stolen child, Alara's tears. "I witnessed guards lining their pockets with coins torn from Omega families. I witnessed ledgers falsified, debts invented, lives destroyed for profit." He pointed a gauntleted finger directly at Silas. "And at the center of this web of corruption stands Beta Counselor Silas." The accusation exploded like a lightning strike. A collective gasp tore through the courtyard. All eyes swung to Silas. For a heartbeat, the counselor was perfectly still. Then his face arranged itself into an expression of profound, wounded dignity. He stepped forward, spreading his hands in a gesture of appeal to the crowd. "My king," he cried, his voice trembling with what sounded like heartfelt distress, "what poison has been poured into your ears? I have served this pack, your father, you, with unwavering loyalty. These are lies spun by those who wish to see our strength divided, who resent the order that keeps us safe. He was good, he was so very good. The crowd wavered, uncertainty replacing shock. Lies. Alistair's voice dropped, becoming dangerously soft. He pulled the anonymous letter from his breastplate. Is the testimony of Lyanna, whose father died in the stocks, a lie? Is the fate of the weaver's child, torn from its mother's arms, a lie? His eyes found Alara in the crowd, and his heart clenched. Is the debt of 12 silver, now magically become 4, levied against an orphan Omega and her brother, a lie? At the mention of her, Alara flinched. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes, those deep forest pools, locked onto his from across the sea of people, and in them he saw the dawning, terrible realization. The beggar, Thuron, the king, the pieces snapped together with brutal force, the color drained completely from her face. Silas followed his gaze, and his eyes narrowed. Understanding flashed there. The vagrant Alara had been feeding. The king in disguise, his downfall delivered in crusts of bread. Rage, pure and venomous, twisted his features for an instant before he smoothed them again. These are tragic tales, my king, but they are distortions, Silas insisted, but his voice had lost its smoothness. A desperate edge had crept in. The Omega girl is a known troublemaker, a thief. She steals food to feed vagabonds, draining our resources. She shared her last crust with a king, Alistair roared, the truth bursting forth. She showed more loyalty, more compassion in one act than you have in a lifetime of service. Guards, this was the moment. The plan required Silas's public arrest, the undeniable presentation of guilt. But Alistair had underestimated the snake's desperation. As the loyal guards moved forward, Silas did not stand in dignified protest. He moved with the shocking speed of a cornered animal. His eyes, wild and calculating, scanned the crowd and landed on the closest, most vulnerable target, Alara. He lunged sideways, shocking people out of his way. Before Kieran could react, before any guard could intervene, Silas had an arm locked around Alara's throat and a slender, wicked dagger pressed against her neck. The courtyard erupted into chaos, screams, shouts. Kieran cried out and tried to grab for his sister, but a backhand from Silas sent him stumbling. Stay back, Silas screamed, his voice cracking. He dragged Alara backward, using her as a shield. All of you, or I swear on the abyss I'll open her throat right here. Time stopped for Alistair. The world narrowed to the point of that blade, to the thin line of blood welling where it kissed Alara's skin, to the terror in her eyes as they found his. Valerius howled a silent scream of pure primal rage. Mine. Let her go, Silas, Alistair said, his voice deathly calm, a contrast to the storm inside. You have nowhere to run. I have this, Silas spat, pressing the blade harder. Alara gasped, a small, pained sound. My passage out. Let me leave and I'll release her at the border. Refuse and your precious, compassionate Omega dies in front of your entire pack. Alistair took a step down from the platform. Every instinct screamed to shift, to tear, to kill, but the blade was at her throat. One twitch, one sudden move. You think you can stop me? Silas was babbling now, his plan unraveling, his grip on sanity slipping. I had plans. I was going to use her bloodline to. You will die first. The voice was not loud, but it carried. It came from Alistair, but it seemed to come from the stones, from the sky itself. Silas's eyes darted toward the castle gate, his escape route. It was the distraction he needed, but it was also the moment Alara, trapped and terrified, acted on pure instinct. She went utterly limp in his hold. Silas staggered, his balance thrown off for a crucial half-second. It was all Alistair needed. He moved. He was not a man running, he was a force of nature unleashed. He crossed the distance in a blur of midnight blue and steel. His hand shot out not for the blade but for Silas's wrist. There was a sickening crack of bone. Silas shrieked, the dagger falling from nerveless fingers. Alara dropped. Guards caught her, pulling her away as Alistair drove his fist into Silas's jaw with a force that lifted the man off his feet. The traitorous counselor crashed to the cobblestones, unconscious before he landed. For a moment, there was only the sound of harsh breathing. Then Alistair turned, his chest heaving, his eyes seeking her. Alara. She stood, supported by guards, one hand pressed to the bleeding cut on her neck. Her face was a mask of shock, pale as parchment, and her eyes held no relief at being saved. They held only a vast, shattered betrayal as they stared at the king who had been a beggar. You, she whispered, the word barely audible but echoing in the sudden quiet. You lied to me. Before he could speak, before he could form a single word of explanation, she wrenched herself free from the guard's supportive hands. She turned, grabbed a stunned Kieran's arm and fled into the panicked, dispersing crowd. Alistair took a step to follow, but a hand on his arm stopped him. Captain Rylan returned from his mission, his expression grim. "The chest is secure, my king. The guards are in chains. The evidence is substantial." The king's work was done, justice was served, but as he watched Alara disappear, the victory turned to ashes in his mouth. He had won his kingdom back from corruption, but he had lost something precious in the battle, something that smelled of snow and pine and had offered him her last crumb of bread. The war was over. A colder, lonelier battle had just begun. Chapter 5: Whispers of Blood and a Brother's Fears. Alara ran. The world blurred around her, the pale faces of the crowd, the towering gray stones of the castle, the bright splash of Silas's blood on the cobblestones. She didn't feel the cut on her neck. She didn't feel the ache in her lungs. She felt only the shattering, the terrible cracking apart of the one fragile good thing she had managed to hold onto in the darkness. Thuron, his kindness, his quiet listening, his sad eyes, a lie, a beautiful, cruel lie. He was King Alistair, the most powerful wolf in the realm, and she had poured out her fears, her dreams for Kieran, her stupid, secret hopes to a king playing a part. Alara slowed down. Kieran gasped, struggling to keep up, his human strength no match for her Omega's panic-fueled speed. "Where are we going?" "Away," she choked out the word raw, "just away from here." But where? Their hut was packed territory. The forest beyond the walls meant death for Kieran. They had nowhere to go. The realization finally forced her to stop, stumbling into a narrow, deserted alley between a chandler's shop and a tavern. She leaned against the cold wall, sliding down until she sat on the damp ground, pulling her knees to her chest. The trembling started then, deep and uncontrollable. Kieran sank down beside her, his face etched with worry. Alara, the king, he was the beggar. A sob ripped from her throat. She nodded, burying her face in her arms. All of it, every word, a game. He was probably laughing at me the whole time, the foolish Omega sharing her crumbs with royalty. "He saved you," Kieran said softly, his logical mind cutting through her despair. "He broke Silas's arm, he stopped him. He put me in that position." She cried, lifting her head, her green eyes blazing with hurt. "His game, his investigation, it made Silas target me. That debt was because of him. The blade at my throat was because I helped him. The truth of it was a fresh wound." Her one act of defiance against a cruel world had been used as a weapon against her. Kieran was silent, absorbing this. Then he reached out and gently touched the drying blood on her neck. "We need to clean this." It was a practical concern, a tiny anchor in the storm. She let him pull a relatively clean cloth from his pocket and dab at the cut. The physical pain was nothing. "What do we do now?" Kieran whispered, the fear finally touching his voice. "Silas is arrested. But the king, he knows who we are, he knows where we live." Alara's blood ran cold. He was right. The king had seen their hut. He knew their vulnerability. Would his gratitude for her unwitting help extend to protection? Or would they now be pawns in some larger political game? After today, she could believe anything. "We can't go home," she said, the finality of it hollowing her out. Home was a shack, but it was theirs. Now it was a trap. Before they could spiral further, a figure appeared at the mouth of the alley. Not a guard, an older woman, her hair a silver braid over one shoulder, her dress simple but well-made. She carried a healer's satchel. Her eyes, pale and intelligent, found them immediately. Alara scrambled to her feet, pushing Kieran behind her. "Stay back." The woman didn't advance. She held up empty, weathered hands. "Peace, child. My name is Maeve. I am the castle healer. I mean you no harm." "The king sent you," Alara accused, her voice trembling. "The king is currently occupied securing a traitor and calming a terrified pack," Maeve said, her voice calm and dry. "No, I came because I saw you run, and because that cut needs proper tending unless you wish it to fester." Her gaze softened. "And because I knew your grandmother, Alara." The world tilted again. "My grandmother, she died when I was a babe. She was a potter's wife." Maeve's lips curved in a faint, sad smile. "No, child, she was heiress Silvermane. And she was the last royal Omega of the northern clans before she went into hiding." The name meant nothing to Alara. "Royal, you're mad, look at me." She gestured at her patched dress, her dirty hands. "I am looking," Maeve said steadily. "I see her eyes. I see her spirit, and I smell it, snow and pine. Not the common Omega scent, the Silvermane scent. It's why Silas kept you close, yet broken. A royal Omega, strong and aware, would have seen through his schemes in a heartbeat. A royal Omega bonded to a king would have had the authority to audit his books. He couldn't allow that, so he kept you hungry, exhausted, and drowning in false debt. The words were too much, too vast, they buzzed around Alara's head like angry wasps. A bloodline, royalty. It was a fairy tale, a cruel joke. Why are you telling me this? Alara whispered, suspicion coiling tight in her gut. Because you need to understand what you are, Maeve said, taking a cautious step forward. And because, whether you believe it or not, the king's reaction to your danger was not the act of a dispassionate ruler. The bond it has begun, I could feel it spark in the courtyard. Bond, what bond? Kieran asked, his voice sharp with protective fear. Maeve's eyes flicked to him, then back to Alara. The mate bond between an alpha king and a royal omega, it is not a choice, it is a recognition, deep, ancient, and undeniable. He felt your terror as if it were his own. That is why he moved as he did. Alara remembered the king's face as he crossed the courtyard, not just anger but a terrifying, primal fear for her. The memory confused her, angered her further. I don't want a bond, I don't want anything from him, he lied to me. And for that he will have to atone, Maeve agreed. But right now you are injured, you are exposed, and you have nowhere to go. Silas may be arrested, but he had allies, wolves who profited from his corruption. You are a loose end, Alara. And you are a symbol. Come with me to the healing wards, it is a place of sanctuary. You and your brother will be safe there while you decide what to do. A gilded cage, Alara muttered, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. A safe room, Maeve corrected. With a lock on your side of the door, you have my word as a healer, sworn to the moon goddess. No one will enter without your permission, not even the king. Alara looked at Kieran. He was pale, frightened, but he gave a tiny, hesitant nod. They were out of options. The alley offered no safety, only cold stone and gathering shadows. Slowly, warily, Alara nodded. The door stays locked. Agreed, Maeve said and turned, leading them not toward the main castle gates but through a small, discreet door used by servants, into the labyrinthine underbelly of the castle. The healing wards were not what Alara expected. They were quiet, clean rooms smelling of herbs and clean linen, not the dungeon-like cells she had imagined. Maeve led them to a small chamber at the end of a corridor. It had a narrow window, 2 cots, a wash basin, and a sturdy oak door with a large, iron key. Maeve placed the key in Alara's hand. Food and water will be brought, I will tend your neck, after that you will be left in peace. She worked efficiently, cleaning the shallow cut with a stinging tincture and applying a sweet-smelling salve. It will not scar, she said quietly. A small mercy. When she was done, she stepped back. I will be just down the hall if you need me, for anything. Her gaze was kind but held a deep, unspoken knowledge. Rest, Alara, the world has shifted beneath your feet. Give yourself time to find your balance. She left, closing the door. Alara heard the click of the lock from the outside. For a moment, panic surged. A trick, but then she remembered she held the key. She was the one who could lock the world out. The power of it, small as it was, steadied her. Kieran sank onto one of the cots, his shoulders slumping. Royal blood, a mate bond with the king? He sounded utterly bewildered. Alara, what is happening? I don't know, she admitted, sitting beside him. But Maeve is right about one thing, we're targets now. Silas's friends will want revenge or to silence us. And the king, she trailed off, the memory of his face, the raw fear in his eyes as Silas held the blade, conflicting violently with the betrayal. I don't know what he wants. As if summoned by her thoughts, a new presence brushed against the edge of her awareness. It was not a sound or a smell, it was a feeling. A low, steady hum of concern, of a fierce, protective watchfulness. It felt like a wall of warmth at her back, it felt like him. She gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Do you feel that? Kieran shook his head, confused. Feel what? The bond, it was real, Maeve was right. Some connection had been forged in the stable, in the sharing of bread and stories, and had snapped taut in the courtyard. She could feel his emotions, a distant storm of guilt, resolve, and a relentless, focused worry that was pointed directly at her. It was invasive, it was terrifying. And yet a tiny, treacherous part of her felt less alone. The feeling shamed her. Nothing, she whispered to Kieran, lying back on the cot and staring at the stone ceiling. It's nothing, but it wasn't nothing. It was a tether to the man who had broken her trust. And as night fell over Silverhold, as the castle settled into an uneasy quiet after the day's upheaval, Alara lay awake, trapped between the walls of a safe room and the invisible walls of a bond she never asked for. The king had unveiled himself to his pack. But for Alara, the shadows had only grown deeper, filled with new whispers of royal blood, of bonds, and of a future that was more terrifyingly uncertain than ever before. Outside their door in the silent corridor, Maeve stood guard, her old eyes knowing. The first move had been made. The pieces were in play, the innocent Omega and the guilty king, and the dangerous, undeniable pull between them that could either heal a broken kingdom or shatter it completely. The game was far from over. Chapter 6: The King's Penance and the Omega's Prison. King Alistair's victory tasted of dust and blood. The great hall, now empty, echoed with the ghost of the day's chaos. Silas was in the deepest oubliette, chained in silver-laced iron that suppressed his wolf. His accomplices, guards Garvin and Foss, had sung like canaries in the face of the evidence from the iron-bound chest, implicating a handful of lesser nobles and merchants. The corrupt machinery was being dismantled, bolt by greasy bolt, by Captain Ryland's loyalists. Justice was being served. The kingdom was being cleansed, and Alistair stood in the center of it all, feeling utterly hollow. He replayed the moment endlessly, Alara's eyes wide with horror and betrayal. "You lied to me," then her flight. He had sent guards to find her to ensure her safety, but they returned empty-handed. Maeve, the venerable healer, had informed him quietly that the girl and her brother were under her protection in the healing wards and would not be disturbed, not even by him. The finality in Maeve's tone had been a judgment all its own. For 3 days he threw himself into the work of reform. He abolished the debt servitude system with a royal decree. He established a council, with Maeve at its head, to oversee the fair redistribution of the stolen wealth back to the Omega families. He announced protections for wolves like Kieran, declaring that a wolf's worth was not in its teeth, but in its heart and mind. The pack was stunned, hopeful, and wary all at once. But through every meeting, every pronouncement, Alistair was acutely aware of a faint, persistent pull in his chest. The mate bond, it was a fragile, trembling thread, but it was there. He could feel her, not her thoughts, but the murky ocean of her emotions, a deep, abiding hurt, a swirling anger, and underneath it all a terrifying, blank exhaustion. It was a constant ache, a wound that would not close. On the 4th day, he could stand it no longer. He went to the healing wards, dismissing the guards at the entrance. Maeve met him in the anteroom, her arms crossed. "She will not see you, Alistair," she said, using his name without title. "The door remains locked from the inside. She has my key." "I need to speak with her, Maeve, to explain." "Explain what? That you used her as a tool in your game, that her kindness made her a target." The old healer's voice was not unkind, but it was unflinching. "She is not a subject to be summoned for an audience, my king, not anymore. The bond has seen to that. She is your equal, whether you have earned that title or not, and right now she sees you as the man who broke her trust." The words landed like blows. "What do I do?" The question came out stripped bare, the voice of a man, not a monarch. Maeve's expression softened a fraction. "You wait, you continue to be the king she needed you to be all along. You prove through action that Thuron was not entirely a lie, and you give her time. The bond may pull, but it cannot force forgiveness. That she must choose. Frustration and guilt warred within him, and if Silas's remaining allies try to reach her, they would have to go through me," Maeve said, her pale eyes glinting, "and through the 2 royal guards I have posted at the far end of the hall on my authority as head of the new council. She is safe, Alistair, safer than she has ever been. Now you must let her be." Defeated, Alistair turned away. The bond thrummed with a fresh pulse of sorrow. Alara's or his own, he could no longer tell. Inside the locked room, Alara was a prisoner of her own mind. The chamber was comfortable. The food that appeared on a tray outside their door was plentiful and good: broths, fresh bread, roast chicken, things she had only ever smelled from a distance. Kieran ate with the desperate gusto of a boy who had known hunger too long, but Alara could only pick at her food. Each bite felt like a betrayal of the girl who had starved in that hut. She spent hours staring out the narrow window, watching the comings and goings in a secluded courtyard below. She saw messengers hurry past, heard the distant sounds of the castle functioning, a world moving on while she stood still. The bond was the worst of it. It was an intrusion, a constant, low-level awareness of him. She felt his frustration during council meetings, his grim satisfaction when a corrupt law was overturned, the ever-present undercurrent of guilt that was tied to her. She tried to hate it, to wall it off, but it was like trying to hold back the tide with her hands. It seeped through. "You're thinking about him again," Kieran said quietly on the 3rd afternoon. He was sitting on his cot, a history book from Maeve open in his lap. "I can't help it," Alara whispered, her forehead against the cool glass. "It's like a noise you can't tune out, a scent you can't escape. Do you believe her, Maeve, about the Silvermane blood? Kieran's voice held a note of awe. I don't know what to believe, Alara sighed. If it's true, what does it change? We're still here, I'm still connected to him. She couldn't bring herself to say the king's name. It just makes everything more complicated. That night she had a dream, not a memory but a strange, vivid fantasy. She was in the stable again, but it was clean and filled with golden hay. Thuron no Alistair sat across from her, but he wore no crown, no fine clothes. He was just a man, his storm-gray eyes full of a sorrow so deep it mirrored her own. He held out his hand, palm up. In it rested not a coin or a jewel, but a single, perfect, golden-brown seed. For the future, he said, his voice the gentle rasp of Thuron, if you choose to plant it. She woke with a start, her heart pounding. The emotion lingering from the dream wasn't fear or anger. It was a profound, aching loneliness, and it wasn't entirely hers. It was his, bleeding through the bond. The king in his stone castle was just as alone as she was in her locked room. The realization unsettled her deeply. On the 5th day, a new tray appeared. Alongside the food was a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. Alara brought it inside, locking the door again. She unwrapped it cautiously. Inside was a book, not a ledger or a royal decree, but a book of poetry from the southern provinces, filled with verses about the sea and stars. There was no note. But nestled between the pages was a single, fresh-baked oatmeal cookie, still slightly warm, the kind a busy cook might make for a child, simple and sweet. Kieran's eyes lit up at the sight of the cookie. Alara stared at it, then at the book. It was not an apology fit for a king, it was an offering fit for a person, a silent, humble acknowledgement of the small comfort she had been denied. It could be poisoned, Kieran said, though his tone was doubtful. Alara broke the cookie in half. She ate one piece. It was delicious, crumbly and sweet with honey. She waited, nothing happened but a warmth in her stomach. She gave the other half to Kieran. She opened the book. The poems were about longing, about distance, about hope being a stubborn flower that grows in cracks of stone. She read them slowly, and for the first time in days, the tight knot of anger in her chest loosened just a fraction. He was trying, not as a king commanding her presence, but as a man reaching out. It didn't erase the lie, it didn't mend the trust. But it was a start. Later, as dusk fell, she felt a shift through the bond. The constant hum of guilt and worry spiked suddenly into a sharp, focused alarm, then a surge of protective fury so intense it stole her breath. She jumped to her feet, her hand going to her throat. What is it? Kieran asked, alarmed. Something's wrong, she breathed, with him. At that moment they heard it, a commotion from somewhere deeper in the castle, shouted orders, the clash of metal. A bestial roar that could only belong to one wolf. The safe room no longer felt safe, it felt like a cage. The bond was a live wire, screaming of danger. Alara's own wolf, usually so quiet and suppressed, stirred uneasily. The fear wasn't just for herself anymore. A treacherous, undeniable part of her was afraid for him. She looked at the key in her hand, then at the locked door. The world outside was full of threats, Silas's allies, the king's enemies, the chaos of a kingdom in upheaval, but the king was out there. And he was in trouble. The pull was no longer just an emotion. It was a command from her very soul. She had sworn to protect Kieran. But the bond was screaming that the greatest danger to them both was not outside the door, it was the possibility of the king falling, leaving the kingdom, and them, at the mercy of the wolves still lurking in the shadows. With a trembling hand, Alara walked to the door. She inserted the key, she turned it, the lock clicked open. She had vowed not to see him, but some forces were stronger than vows, some calls could not be ignored. She opened the door, stepping out of her prison and into the dim corridor, towards the sound of the fight, Kieran close behind her. The thread between them pulled taut, a guide wire leading her into the heart of the storm. The game had changed again. The pawn was making her first move. Chapter 7, The uninvited guests. The corridor outside the healing ward was dim and silent, but the distant sounds of conflict were a living thing, crawling through the stone. That bestial roar, it echoed in Alara's bones, a sound of pure alpha fury that made her wolf whimper inside her. The bond was a frantic drumbeat in her chest, a thunderous danger, danger, danger that overrode all caution. Alara, wait, Kieran hissed, grabbing her arm. We should lock the door, barricade ourselves in, Maeve said. Maeve isn't here, Alara interrupted, her voice thin with a fear that wasn't entirely her own. The king's terror was a sour taste in her mouth, mingling with her own, and that's a fight, a bad one. If his enemies win, she didn't need to finish the thought. If the king fell, Silas's allies would swarm the castle. Their safe room would become a tomb. The pull was magnetic, undeniable. She crept forward, Kieran clinging to her shadow, his breath loud in the quiet hall. They moved away from the healing wards towards the older, more disused sections of the castle's undercroft. The sounds grew clearer, snarls, the crash of breaking wood, a man's pained shout. They rounded a corner and froze. The scene in the narrow storeroom corridor was one of violent chaos. 3 wolves, shifted and massive, had King Alastair cornered. They were not guards, their fur was matted and unkempt, their eyes glinting with feral hatred. Rogues, or worse, pack wolves turned mercenary. One lay motionless against a shattered barrel, but the other 2 harried the king with coordinated savagery. Alastair was in his human form, a strategic choice in the confined space, but it was putting him at a disadvantage. He fought with a short sword in one hand, a dagger in the other, moving with a lethal, graceful precision that spoke of a lifetime of training. But he was bleeding from a deep gash on his shoulder, and his movements were slowing. The black wolf, Valerius, was a palpable pressure in the air, but he couldn't shift without giving the beasts an opening to tear out his throat. One rogue lunged, jaws snapping for Alastair's leg. He pivoted, his sword drawing a line of red across the wolf's flank, but the movement exposed his back to the second attacker. That wolf leaped, a killing pounce aimed for his spine. Alara didn't think, she acted. A scream tore from her throat, not of fear, but of pure, furious denial. No, the sound, high and sharp, echoed in the stone passage. The leaping wolf faltered, its head twisting toward her for a split second. It was all the distraction Alastair needed. He dropped into a roll, the wolf's claws tearing through his cloak instead of his flesh, and came up, driving his dagger up into the beast's exposed underside. The rogue collapsed with a choked yelp. But the first wolf, wounded and enraged, now turned its blood-red eyes on the new arrivals, on her. It recognized her. She saw the intelligence in its gaze. This was no mindless beast. This was an assassin, and she was a target. It charged, time slowed. Alara saw the saliva dripping from its fangs, the matted gray fur, the murderous intent. She saw Alastair's horrified face, saw him try to rise, too slow, too far away. She felt Kieran try to shove her behind him, and something within her broke open. It wasn't a shift. It was a surge, a wave of power, cold and clear as a mountain glacier, erupted from her core. It had no physical form, but it had presence. The air crackled. The charging wolf skidded to a halt as if it had hit an invisible wall. It whimpered, flattening its ears, its furious eyes suddenly clouded with confusion and submission. It took a stumbling step backward, then another, before turning and fleeing down a side passage, its tail tucked. Silence descended, broken only by the harsh panting of the king and the pounding of Alara's heart. She stared at the spot where the wolf had been, her own body trembling violently. What had she done? Alara. The voice was ragged, pained. Alastair was leaning against the wall, clutching his bleeding shoulder, his eyes wide with a shock that mirrored her own. She turned to look at him. The king was gone. In his place was a wounded, exhausted man, his face pale, his magnificent armor scored and bloody. Thuron's eyes full of awe and fear. The sight undid her. The fury, the betrayal, the walls she'd built, they crumbled under the visceral reality of his near death and the terrifying, unknown thing she had just done. "You're hurt," she whispered, the words automatic. Boots pounded down the corridor. Captain Rylan and a squad of guards arrived, weapons drawn, their faces grim. They took in the scene, the dead rogues, the bleeding king, the Omega girl and her brother standing stunned in the aftermath. "My king," Rylan rushed forward. "I'm fine," Alastair gritted out, though he clearly was. His eyes never left Alara. "Secure the area, find out how they got in. And find that third wolf." As guards swarmed, Alastair took a step toward her, then swayed. Alara was moving before she realized it, closing the distance to slide a shoulder under his good arm, supporting his weight. He was heavy, solid, real. The scent of blood and sweat and his unique, stormy scent overwhelmed the clean smell of snow and pine for a moment. "You should," he began, but his protest was weak. "Be quiet," she said, her voice trembling but firm. She looked at Rylan. "He needs the healer, now." Maeve arrived moments later, her satchel in hand, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She took charge, directing guards to bring the king to a nearby antechamber. Alara helped lower him onto a bench, her hands stained with his blood. The bond was a wild, tumultuous thing. His pain was a fiery ache in her own shoulder, his shock and gratitude a warm, confusing flood. Maeve worked quickly, cleaning the deep claw marks. "You're lucky. No major vessels severed, but it will need stitching. And you," she said, glancing up at Alara, "will need to explain what happened to that wolf. I don't know what happened, Alara said, wrapping her arms around herself. It just stopped. It bowed, Kieran said quietly, his eyes huge. It looked at you and it bowed its head and it ran. Maeve and Alistair exchanged a look. The healer's expression was one of grim confirmation. The Silvermane gift, command, not control, not compulsion, but an aura of such innate royal authority that lesser wolves instinctively submit. It hasn't been seen in generations. Alara felt sick. I'm not royal, I'm a washerwoman. You are both, Alistair said, his voice strained as Maeve threaded a needle. His eyes held hers, intense and earnest. And you saved my life, again, the word again hung between them. The bread in the stable, the intervention in the corridor. She had a habit of saving kings who didn't deserve it. Why were they here? She asked, needing to focus on anything but the bewildering look in his eyes. Silas's friends, Alistair grunted, clenching his jaw as the needle went in. Trying to cut off the head of the snake before the body dies. They knew the dungeons were too well guarded. They came for me. He looked at her, his gaze softening with a worry that was entirely for her. They must have seen you with me in the courtyard. You're not safe, Alara, not even here. The reality was a cold splash of water. The attack wasn't an end. It was a beginning, a declaration of war from the shadows. You need protection, Alistair said. Real protection, not a locked door. I had protection, she fired back, the old anger flaring. I had a brother and a hut and anonymity. You took that, you made me a symbol. A target, he flinched and she felt his pain through the bond, sharper than the needle. I know, he said, the words thick with remorse, and I will spend every day of my life trying to make that right, but for now, please let me protect you. Not as a king, as the man who owes you his life, twice over. Maeve tied off the final stitch. He's right, child, the secret of your blood is out, that wolf will talk. Silas's network is wounded but not dead. They will come for you either to eliminate you or to use you. She placed a gentle hand on Alara's arm. The safest place in this kingdom for now is at the king's side, where his guards are thickest and his wolf is strongest. The thought was abhorrent. To be constantly near him, a living reminder of his deception, tied to him by this inexplicable bond. But the alternative, letting Kieran face those wolves alone, she looked at her brother. His face was pale, but he gave her a small, brave nod. We do what we must. Alara took a deep, shuddering breath. The path of safety was also the path of greatest pain, but it was the only path she had. Fine, she said, the word tasting of defeat. We stay, but not in the royal chambers, somewhere neutral, and my brother stays with me always. A look of profound relief crossed Alistair's pained face. Agreed, the Sun Tower, it has its own guard post, a separate entrance, you'll have your own space, your privacy. He hesitated, and Alara, thank you for coming out of that room, she didn't answer. She just turned and walked to the doorway, needing space from his intensity, from the bond, from the terrifying new power humming in her veins. As she stood in the corridor, looking at the bloodstains on the stone, she knew one thing for certain. The attack had changed everything. She was no longer just a wronged Omega. She was a player in the game now, with a power she didn't understand and enemies she hadn't chosen. And the king, the liar, the beggar, was the only shield she had. The war for the kingdom's soul was not over. It had just entered a new, more dangerous chapter, and she was trapped at the very center of it. Chapter 8, The Sun Tower and the Shadowed Truth. The Sun Tower was a world apart from the dank undercroft and the healing wards. It was an ancient spire on the castle's eastern wall, named for the way dawn painted its pale stones gold each morning. It was indeed neutral ground, never used as a royal residence but maintained for honored, sometimes inconvenient, guests. It had its own small courtyard, a separate entrance guarded by Ryland's most trusted men, and a spiral staircase leading to a set of airy, sparsely furnished rooms at the top. To Alara, it felt like another, finer cage. But the lock this time was on the outside, keeping threats away rather than her in. That small difference was everything. They were installed with quiet efficiency. A stern-faced female guard named Lyra was assigned as their personal protector, her loyalty to Ryland absolute. Supplies arrived, clothes that were simple but well-made and fit properly, books for Kieran, baskets of food that needed no preparation. Everything they could need except freedom. For 3 days, a fragile, exhausting routine settled. Alara avoided the main castle. She spent hours in the tower's high window seat, watching the world below, the training yards, the market beyond the walls, the distant line of the forest. The bond was a constant, humming presence. She could feel Alistair moving through his day, the weight of his responsibilities, the lingering ache of his wound, and beneath it all, a watchful, protective focus that was always tuned to her. It was infuriating. It was secretly a little comforting. She hated that most of all. He did not visit, he kept his word, but he sent things, not grand gifts but thoughtful ones, a pot of ink and good parchment for Kieran, who had begun sketching maps of the castle with startling accuracy, a woven blanket, thick and warm, the color of heather. And books, not just poetry now, but histories of the northern clans, books on herb lore, tales of famous Omegas who had been healers and diplomats. He was speaking to her in a language of quiet respect, acknowledging her mind, her potential. It was a disarming strategy. How could she rage against a man who seemed to be trying to see her? On the fourth morning, Maeve came. She brought fresh bandages for Alistair's shoulder and a keen, assessing look for Alara. After checking the king's wound in his quarters, she ascended the tower. "Walk with me in the courtyard," she said, her tone brooking no argument. The small, walled garden was private. Early spring blooms poked through the well-tended soil. Maeve did not speak until they were at the far end, away from the guard at the door. "The wolf you commanded," Maeve began without preamble, described the feeling. Alara wrapped her arms around herself. "It was like a door bursting open inside me, a flood of cold water. I didn't tell it to do anything, I just didn't want it to hurt him." She glanced at Maeve, ashamed. "Is that the Silvermane power, weakness for an alpha?" Maeve's smile was thin. "No, child, that is the mate bond. The power is separate. It is your birthright. What you felt was your royal blood reacting to a threat to your bonded mate. It was raw, instinctual, untrained." She fixed Alara with her pale eyes. "It will happen again, and next time you must be ready. You must learn to channel it, or it will control you." "I don't want it," Alara whispered. "What we want and what we are given are rarely the same," Maeve said, not unkindly. "You can refuse this power, let it lie dormant and dangerous within you, or you can master it, use it to protect yourself, your brother, and others." She paused. "He is working night and day to dismantle Silas's network, but there are whispers. The third wolf, the one that fled, it spoke to its masters before Ryland's trackers found and silenced it. They know what you did, they know what you are. You are no longer just the king's inconvenient witness. You are a threat to their entire world. A royal Omega with awakened power is a symbol that could rally the very people they've oppressed. They must destroy you or control you." Alara's blood ran cold. The walls of the sun tower suddenly seemed terribly thin. "What do I do?" The question was a plea. "You let me teach you," Maeve said. "We start with control, with sensing intent. Your power is not for attack, it is for discernment and authority. You can learn to feel a lie, to sense malicious intent before it strikes, to project an aura of calm or command. These are the tools of a royal Omega, the tools of a queen." "I am not a queen," Alara said sharply. "Not yet," Maeve replied, her gaze knowing. "But the bond does not lie, Alara, and the kingdom needs more than a righteous king. It needs healing. It needs the compassion you showed a beggar in a stable. It needs the strength you showed in that corridor. Whether you wear a crown or not, your role has already been chosen." The weight of it was crushing. Alara turned away, staring at a fragile yellow blossom fighting its way through a crack in the flagstones, a stubborn flower in the stone. "Will you learn?" Maeve asked softly. Alara thought of Kieran's face, of the wolf's bloody fangs, of the king's pain echoing in her own shoulder. She thought of the countless Omegas still trembling in the shadows of Silverhold. She had spent her life being acted upon. Shaped by loss, by debt, by cruelty. For the first time she had a chance to act, to shape. She took a deep breath, the scent of turned earth and early blooms filling her lungs. "Yes," she said, her voice firm, "teach me." The lessons began that afternoon in the privacy of the tower's main room. Maeve started with breathing, with centering. Your power is tied to your emotions, but it must not be ruled by them. Find the calm beneath the storm. She had Alara practice sensing the emotions of others in the courtyard below, the boredom of the guard, the focused determination of a maid hurrying past. It was like tuning a hidden sense, faint and flickering at first. Kieran watched, fascinated, acting as a test subject. Alara would close her eyes and try to sense his mood. "You're thinking about the book on engineering," she said once, startling him. "You're excited but frustrated, the diagrams are confusing." He gaped. "How did you—" "It's not thoughts," Maeve corrected. "It's the emotional texture around the thoughts." A valuable skill for a ruler or an advisor. As the days passed, Alara's control grew. She learned to raise a gentle, calming aura, one that made skittish servant girls relax in her presence. she learned to sense the sharp, metallic taste of a lie. She practiced for hours, the mental exertion leaving her as drained as a day of washing ever had. Through it all, the bond with Alistair was a constant, complicating factor. She could feel his approval of her studies, a warm, proud glow that she stubbornly tried to ignore. She could also feel the mounting pressure he was under, the stubborn resistance of the old noble families, the discovery of another hidden cache of stolen goods, the ever-present threat of another attack. One evening, a week after moving to the tower, the bond spiked with a sharp, icy frustration, followed by a wave of lonely exhaustion so profound it made her chest ache. She was sitting by the fire, trying to read, but his emotions were a distraction she couldn't shut out. She stood up abruptly. Kieran looked up from his sketches. "I'll be back," she said, her voice tight. She walked to the door, nodded to Lyra, and descended the spiral stairs. She didn't think about where she was going. The bond pulled her like a compass needle. She found him not in the throne room or his war room, but in a small, cluttered solar attached to the royal library. He was seated at a desk buried under scrolls and ledgers, his head in his hands. The great black wolf, Valerius, was a palpable shadow in the room, a sense of weary vigilance. Alistair hadn't heard her enter. He looked up, and the surprise on his face was quickly masked by a careful neutrality. "Ilara, is everything all right?" "Is Kieran?" "We're fine," she said, hovering in the doorway. The bond was singing now, a tangled knot of his surprise, his hope, his aching tiredness. "You're not." He leaned back in his chair, a weary smile touching his lips. "Is it that obvious? To me, yes." The admission cost her. She stepped fully into the room. "The reforms, like pulling teeth from a live bear," he sighed, rubbing his eyes. "Every decree is met with a petition, every confiscated asset has a dozen rightful claimants. The old structures are fighting back. And Silas from his cell is somehow still sending messages, stirring dissent." He looked at her, his storm-gray eyes shadowed. "I dismantled the machine, but I'm now sitting in the wreckage, trying to build something new while the former operators throw stones." Ilara moved closer, drawn despite herself. She looked at the ledgers. They were the real ones now, but the numbers told a story of deep, systemic rot. "You can't do it alone," she said quietly. "I know." His gaze was intense on her face. "Maeve tells me you are learning quickly. That your gift is strong." She didn't answer that. Instead, she pointed to a line in an open ledger. "This levy on Omega Crafts, it's still here. You abolished debt servitude, but this tax makes it impossible for an Omega to profit from their own skill. It's a different kind of cage." Alistair stared at the line, then at her, a new respect dawning in his eyes. "I didn't see that." "You wouldn't," she said, not with accusation, but with simple fact. "You've never had to calculate if your work would earn you enough to eat after the pack took its share." "I have." She met his gaze. "You want to rebuild, then you need advisors who have lived in the world you're trying to fix. Not just old nobles and warriors." For a long moment he just looked at her. The air between them crackled with the unspoken bond, with the memory of bread and blood, of lies and a life saved. "Will you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Will you advise me, not as a subject or a mate, but as Ilara who sees what I cannot?" It was the question she had been secretly dreading and, she realized, secretly preparing for. Maeve's lessons, the books he sent, her own burning desire to make the suffering stop, it all led here, to this moment, to a choice. She could retreat to the tower, a protected, passive figure, or she could step into the wreckage with him and help build. She thought of Kieran's future, of Liana, the Omega from the tax line, of the pregnant woman in the stocks, her people. She took a deep breath, the scent of old parchment and his stormy presence filling her senses. "On one condition," she said, her voice clear and steady in the quiet room. "My brother is given a formal position, archivist or scribe. His mind is his strength, it must be valued." A look of profound relief and something deeper, something like joy, washed over Alistair's features. "Done." Without hesitation. "Then yes," Ilara said, squaring her shoulders. "I will advise you." It was not forgiveness, it was not acceptance of the bond, it was a treaty, a strategic alliance. But as she stood there in the pool of lamplight, facing the king who had been a beggar, she felt the first, faint whisper of something new. Not the crumbling of walls, but the drawing of a new blueprint, together. The path ahead was fraught with danger and shadow. But for the first time, Ilara was not being dragged down it. She was choosing to walk, and she was not alone. Chapter 9, The Council of Shadows and Sunlight. Ilara's appointment to the King's Advisory Council sent shockwaves through the remnants of Silverhold's old guard. A royal Omega, a former washerwoman, a girl, seated among elders and warriors, it was unprecedented, scandalous. To some it was a sign of the king's weakness, to others a terrifying portent of a new world order. The council chamber was a vast, circular room beneath the throne room, its walls lined with tapestries depicting historic battles and treaties. The heavy oak table felt like a moat separating her from the other members. There was Lord Bryce, a grizzled old alpha whose family had controlled the northern forests for centuries, his expression permanently set in a skeptical frown. Lady Cora, a sharp-eyed beta who managed the kingdom's intricate trade agreements, studied Alara as if she were a new and potentially unstable commodity. Captain Rylan was there, a bastion of stoic loyalty, and Maeve, a calm, knowing presence at the king's right hand. And at the head Alistair, his shoulder healed but still stiff, his gaze a steady anchor in the storm of silent disapproval. Alara sat straight in her simple gray dress, hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. She could feel the room's emotions without even trying, Bryce's simmering resentment, a sharp, coppery taste, Cora's cold, analytical curiosity, Ryland's wary protectiveness. And from Alistair a steady stream of supportive confidence willing her strength. The bond was a lifeline and a distraction. The first order of business, Alistair began, his voice cutting through the tension, is the reallocation of the assets recovered from Silas's corruption. Master Bryce, your proposal. Bryce cleared his throat, unrolling a scroll. The silver and goods should be returned to the pack treasury to bolster our defenses and replenish our granaries. Strength must be our priority. We can then distribute aid as we see fit to the most deserving. Alara's new sense flared. The words were reasonable, but the emotional undertone was greed and a desire to re-establish control. She saw the plan to take the wealth, dole out pittances, and keep the power structure intact. Before she could second-guess herself, she spoke. Her voice, though quiet, carried in the stone room. With respect, Lord Bryce, that repeats the error of the past. All eyes snapped to her. Bryce's frown deepened. Explain, girl. She flinched at the address but held his gaze. If the pack treasury controls everything, then the power remains centralized. The Omegas and low-ranked families become supplicants, begging for what is rightfully theirs. That is what allowed Silas's system to flourish. She leaned forward slightly, her green eyes earnest. The ledgers show exactly who was overcharged, who had property seized. The assets should be returned directly to those families. Let them rebuild their own lives, let them own their security. That is true strength, a pack where every member stands on solid ground. Silence. Cora's eyebrows were raised. Rylan watched Bryce carefully. Maeve hid a small smile. Bryce sputtered. Preposterous. We cannot have common wolves holding significant coin. It invites disorder, reckless spending. Does it? Alara asked, tilting her head. Or does it invite them to repair their homes, buy tools, start businesses, and contribute more to the pack's prosperity? A hungry wolf is a weak wolf. A thriving wolf is a strong one. She was quoting her father's wisdom, words she'd heard him say a lifetime ago. Alistair's emotion through the bond was a warm surge of pride. An intriguing perspective, he said, his tone neutral. Lady Cora from a trade standpoint. Cora tapped a finger on the table, her gaze calculating. Direct restitution would be administratively complex, she said slowly, but it would inject coin directly into the local economy. Markets would flourish, taxable trade would increase. In the long term, the Treasury would recover the funds through legitimate growth, not confiscation. She gave Alara a conceding nod. It is a risk, but potentially a profitable one. The debate raged for an hour. Alara, guided by her newfound sense of truth and her lived experience, held her ground. She didn't win every point. Bryce managed to argue for a small portion to remain in the Treasury for pack-wide infrastructure. But the core of her idea, direct, documented restitution, was adopted. It was a victory. Small but seismic. As the council adjourned, Bryce swept out without a word. Cora paused beside Alara. You have a mind for resource flow, girl, unrefined but sharp. We shall speak more. It was not warmth, but it was recognition. When they were alone, save for Maeve and Rylan, Alistair let out a long breath. Well done, he said to Alara, his eyes shining. You saw the trap in his proposal that I missed, the trap of benevolent control. Alara's cheeks warmed. I just said what seemed obvious. What is obvious to those who have suffered is often invisible to those who have not, Maeve said, gathering her notes. That is your value, Alara, never forget it. The days that followed settled into a new, intense rhythm. Mornings were for council work and studying Maeve's lessons on Omega history and law. Afternoons were for her training with the healer, learning to refine her gift. She practiced projecting calm in the busy kitchens, sensing for hidden malice among the new servants being vetted by Rylan. She grew stronger, more confident. Her relationship with Alistair became a careful, charged dance. In council, they were king and advisor, a partnership that grew more instinctive each day. He learned to read her slight frown as a sign of a hidden flaw in a proposal. She learned to sense his building frustration before it boiled over. They were a good team. Alone, it was more complicated. He would often come to the Sun Tower in the evenings, under the pretext of discussing council matters or checking on Kieran's progress as a junior archivist. They would talk of policy, of pack history, of their hopes for Valdoria. The conversation would inevitably drift, becoming more personal. He told her of his lonely childhood under his father's harsh rule, of his dreams for a united, just realm. She spoke more of her parents, of small, happy memories before the darkness, of her fears for Kieran's future. The bond thrummed between them, a live wire of shared emotion. Sometimes, when they laughed over a shared joke, the warmth that spread through her was so profound it felt like belonging. Other times, catching him watching her with an expression of aching tenderness, the old hurt would resurface, a cold stone in her stomach. Trust was being rebuilt, brick by painful brick, but the ghost of Thuron's lie still walked the halls between them. One evening he brought a chess set. "A strategist's game," he said, setting it up on a table by the fire. "I thought you might enjoy it." They played. She learned quickly, her mind agile, seeing patterns he missed. She won their third game, trapping his king with a clever sacrifice of her queen. He stared at the board, stunned, then laughed, a real, unguarded sound that made her heart skip. "You are full of surprises, Alara of the Sun Tower." The use of the new title, acknowledging her place, warmed her. "You left your flank open, you were distracted." His smile faded, his gaze turning serious. "I was," he admitted, "by you." The air grew thick. The fire crackled, the bond swelled with his nervous hope, his deep, sincere affection. Alara's breath caught. This was the precipice. The moment the treaty could become something more. Before either could speak, a frantic knocking shattered the moment. Lyra entered, her face grim. "My king, my lady." A report from the dungeon guards. "Silas, he's dead." All warmth fled. Alistair was on his feet. How? He was under constant watch. "Poison," Lyra said, "concealed in a seam of his clothing. He must have been carrying it since his arrest, waiting for the right moment." He left a note. Alistair took the scrap of parchment Lyra offered. His face hardened as he read, then he handed it to Alara. The writing was spidery, desperate. "You tear down my house, but the foundations are not mine alone. The rot is in the stone. The shadowed circle endures. The Omega will be the key, or she will be the lock. Choose wisely, false king." A chill deeper than any winter wind swept through the room. Silas was not a lone villain, he was part of a circle. And they had just declared their next move. Alara was the target, the key or the lock, to be used or to be broken. The fragile piece of the Sun Tower was over. The game had just turned deadly again. The Council of Sunlight had been infiltrated by shadows they could not yet see, and in the center of it all, the bond between King and Omega tightened, not with promise but with a shared, chilling dread. Chapter 10: The Lock and the Key. The note from Silas was a poisoned dart that hung in the air of the Sun Tower long after the words had been read. The shadowed circle. The Omega will be the key, or she will be the lock. The threat was no longer vague. It had a name, and it had Alara in its sights. For Alistair, the king, it triggered a siege mentality. Guard rotations around the tower doubled. Every servant who entered was vetted by both Rylan and Maeve. Food was tasted before it reached their floor. The windows, once a source of light and view, now felt like vulnerabilities. He wanted to move her into the heart of the royal quarters, a fortress within a fortress, but Alara refused. The Sun Tower was their agreed neutral ground, and retreating from it felt too much like surrender. For Alara, the threat triggered something else, a fierce, burning resolve. She was done being a passive target. Silas had called her a key or a lock. She would be neither. She would be the hammer. Her training with Maeve intensified. They moved beyond sensing emotions to reading the subtle imprint of intent left on objects in rooms. Maeve called it echo sense. Alara would sit in the council chamber after it had emptied, her hands resting on the polished oak, trying to feel the lingering traces of the discussions. At first there was nothing, then faint impressions, Bryce's stubborn frustration, Cora's sharp focus, Alistair's determined optimism. It was like listening to a muted echo of a conversation. Good, Maeve would say. Now search for the note that doesn't belong, the shadow in the harmony. Days passed, tense and watchful. Kieran, now officially the junior archivist, buried himself in the castle's oldest records, searching for any mention of a shadowed circle. He found oblique references in century-old ledgers to a Covenant of the Veil, a secret society of wealthy merchants and minor nobles who had opposed the unification of the Pax. Could it be the same group, dormant and now reawoken by Silas's reforms? The council meetings grew more strained. Bryce argued aggressively for increased military patrols along the noble estates to prevent unrest. Cora pointed out with icy logic that unrest was more likely in the overtaxed lower districts. Alistair, with Alara's quiet counsel, pushed for the continued redistribution of wealth. The fractures in the pack were becoming visible at the highest level. One afternoon, as the council argued over grain subsidies, Alara felt it. A cold, slithering sensation, entirely different from the hot anger or cool calculation in the room. It was a void, a deliberate suppression of true feeling. It was coming from Lord Bryce, not during his blustery speeches, but in the quiet moments when he thought no one was looking. When Alistair spoke of justice for the Omegas, that cold void in Bryce would pulse with something dark, not just disagreement, but a visceral hatred. She didn't speak of it in the meeting, but afterward, as they walked back to the Sun Tower with their escort, she shared her suspicion with Alistair and Maeve. Bryce, Alistair frowned, his steps slowing. He's traditional, stubborn, but his family has always been loyal. Loyal to their own power, Maeve mused. Alara's sense is not to be dismissed. The old families lost the most when Silas fell. They lost a profitable arrangement. Bryce would have the motive. But is he part of this circle? Alistair asked, his voice low. There's one way to know for certain, Alara said, an idea forming. We need to get him to reveal himself, to make a move. Use you as bait. Alistair's response was immediate, fierce. Absolutely not. Not as bait, Alara countered, her mind racing. As a catalyst. The note said I'm the key or the lock. The circle will be watching, waiting to see which I become. So let's show them the key, publicly. She laid out her plan. The next phase of the restitution was the return of seized property deeds. It was a volatile process, involving public ceremonies where families were given back their homes and shops. Alara proposed she take a leading role in the next ceremony, in the market square. She would stand before the pack not as a hidden advisor but as the face of the new order, the Royal Omega facilitating justice. You'll be exposed, Alistair argued, fear for her a sharp, sour taste in his own mouth, echoed through the bond. I'll be surrounded by Ryland's guards and you, she said, meeting his eyes. But more importantly, I'll be a symbol. If Bryce or the Circle want to stop this change, if they want to break the key, that will be their moment to try, and we will be ready. It was dangerous, it was a gamble with her life, but it was also the first truly proactive move they could make. After a long, tense silence, Alistair nodded, his jaw tight. We do it, but every detail, every guard, every escape route is planned, and you wear concealed armor. The day of the ceremony arrived, bright and cold. The market square was packed, a sea of hopeful, anxious faces. A platform was erected where the tax line had once stood. Alistair stood at the center, a figure of imposing authority. But all eyes were on Alara, who stood beside him, dressed in a gown of deep forest green, her chestnut hair braided and crowned with a simple silver circlet Maeve had produced from some ancient vault. She looked every inch the Royal Omega she was born to be. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her face calm, projecting an aura of serene assurance she had practiced with Maeve. As Alistair spoke, announcing the return of the deeds, she stepped forward to call the names from the new, honest ledger. Myra of the Western Quarter, she called, her voice clear and steady. The young Omega from the tax line stepped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. Alara handed her the deed to her family's leased cottage, now hers free and clear. Myra clutched it to her chest, tears streaming down her face, and instead of bowing to the king, she turned and bowed deeply to Alara. Thank you, my lady. The crowd murmured, a sound of awe. This was new, this was different. One by one, Alara called them forward. The elderly man, the mother with children. Each time she handed them their future, and each time they acknowledged her. The symbol was taking root. She could feel the hope blooming in the square, a warm, golden light pushing back against the old fear. And she could feel the other thing, too, the cold, watching hatred. It wasn't just from the crowd, it was focused, coming from the upper window of a merchant's house overlooking the square, Bryce's townhouse. She didn't look. She kept her focus on the ceremony, on the joyful, tearful faces. But she nudged Alistair's awareness through the bond, a gentle press toward that window. He gave an almost imperceptible nod. Rylan, positioned at the edge of the square, saw the signal and melted into the crowd. The ceremony concluded without incident. The crowd cheered, a genuine, hopeful sound. As they turned to leave the platform, Alara allowed herself a breath of relief. Had it worked? Had they called the circle's bluff? Then, as they descended the steps, a man shoved his way through the dispersing crowd. He was dressed as a blacksmith, his face smudged with soot, but his eyes were too sharp, too clean. He moved with purpose straight toward Alara, his hand dipping into his leather apron. For the circle, he snarled, pulling out a short, cruel blade. Chaos erupted, screams. Guards surged forward, but the man was fast, unnaturally fast. He barreled through two guards, his eyes fixed on Alara with fanatical intensity. Alistair moved to shield her, but Alara acted on instinct. She didn't flinch, she didn't run. She stood her ground, looked directly into the assassin's eyes, and pushed. It wasn't the wild surge of power from the corridor. This was focused, controlled, a spear of pure royal command. She poured all her training, all her will into a single, silent order: halt. The assassin stumbled as if he'd hit a wall. His momentum vanished. His furious expression slackened into confusion. The blade clattered from his fingers. He stood there, swaying, utterly disoriented. Ryland's guards were on him in an instant, pinning him to the ground. The square fell silent, every eye on Alara. She was breathing hard, the effort of the command draining her. Alistair was at her side, his hand on her arm, his face a mix of terror and awe. From the window of Bryce's townhouse there was a flash of movement, a curtain twitching shut. They had their confirmation. The attack was the circle's move, and Alara had not been the lock they broke. She had been the key that turned, and in turning had sprung their trap, exposing their agent, and they hoped, leading them back to the master in the shadows. As the guards hauled the dazed assassin away, Alara looked out over the silent, staring crowd. The fear was back in their eyes, but it was mixed with something new. Wonder. They had seen her power. They had seen her stand unflinching. She was no longer just the king's advisor or the beggar's benefactor. She was Alara Silvermane. And the shadowed circle had just made their worst mistake. They had shown the pack that the key was also a weapon, and she was only just learning how to fight. The game was now in the open, and the next move was hers. Chapter 11: The Unraveling Thread. The captured assassin, a man named Doran, proved to be a dead end. Under rigorous questioning, not torture, a line Alistair refused to cross, Doran revealed nothing. He was a fanatic, mouthing slogans about natural order and cleansing the weak, but he knew no names, only a handler who communicated through dead drops. The trail went cold at a burnt-out message box in the sewers. But the attempt had succeeded in one thing. It confirmed the shadowed circle was real, active, and willing to strike in broad daylight. The cold, watchful hatred Alara had felt from Bryce's window now had a bloody context. They couldn't arrest a High Lord on a feeling, on an Omega's intuition, no matter how trusted. They needed proof, so they wove a web of their own. Alistair called a private meeting of the Inner Council: Bryce, Cora, Rylan, Maeve, and Alara. The topic: the sensitive matter of the noble families, historical land grants, many of which were based on centuries-old treaties that were inconvenient to the new, more equitable map of Valdoria Alistair and Alara were drawing. Some concessions will have to be reviewed, Alistair stated, his voice leaving no room for debate. He unrolled a map. The Bryce family's exclusive logging rights in the Northern Weald, for instance, they conflict with the restored hunting grounds of the Amberleaf Omega clan. Lord Bryce's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. Those rights were granted by King Thuron I. They are inviolable. No right is inviolable if it strangles the pack, Alara said quietly, her eyes on the map, not on him. She could feel his rage, a boiling, toxic stew. Beneath it the cold void pulsed, a secret kept. The Amberleaf clan has subsisted on that game for generations. Your logging has driven the herds away. This is not about tradition, it is about survival. You dare, Bryce began, sputtering. I dare to read a ledger, Alara interrupted, her gaze lifting to meet his. She pushed a gentle probe of her power toward him, not to command, but to sense. The void resisted, a slick, oily shield, but around the edges she felt the fear. Not fear of losing trees, but fear of exposure. The timber yields from the Weald have been declining for years, yet your reported profits have not. Where is the discrepancy, my lord? It was a shot in the dark, based on Kieran's late-night discovery in the archives. Bryce's reported shipments didn't match the portmaster's older, uncorrupted logs. Bryce froze. The cold void flickered, and for a split second, true panic seeped through. He recovered quickly, slamming a fist on the table. I will not be interrogated by a child and a jumped-up servant over forged numbers. This is an outrage. He stood, his chair scraping loudly. If this is the direction of your reign, Alistair, you stand alone. He stormed out. The silence he left behind was heavy. He's guilty, Cora stated flatly, her earlier curiosity about Alara now solidified into respect. No one blusters that much over a logging audit unless they're hiding a dragon. But of what? Rylan mused. Smuggling, tax evasion, something that funds the circle, Maeve said. Silas needed a source of wealth outside the treasury he controlled. Bryce has land, resources, and a network of loyal foresters who ask no questions. The plan was set in motion. While Bryce raged in his manor, Ryland's most stealthy trackers, wolves with gifts for moving unseen, infiltrated the northern Weald. Alara, connected to Alistair through the bond, stayed in the war room, a living conduit for the tension. She could feel his focused intensity as he awaited reports, his worry for his men, his simmering anger at the betrayal. 2 days later, the report came, not from a tracker, but from a bloodied, exhausted Omega forester who stumbled into a village guard post at the Weald's edge. He carried a message not on parchment but carved into a piece of bark. Moonstone, deep mine, slaves, circle. Moonstone, a rare glittering mineral used in fine jewelry and more importantly in powerful focusing talismans for certain magical gifts. It was worth a fortune. And it was being mined on Bryce's land, with slaves, the pieces snapped together with awful clarity. Silas's corruption provided the victims, Omegas, with debts. Bryce's remote land provided the location. The Moonstone provided the wealth to fund the Shadowed Circle's operations. It was a perfect, hidden engine of misery. Alistair's rage was a silent, terrifying inferno. Alara felt it through the bond, a scorching heat that threatened to consume his usual control. This was worse than theft, worse than political manipulation. This was a return to the darkest days of shifter history. We move now, Alistair said, his voice like grinding stone. Rylan, muster the royal guard. We ride for the Weald at dawn, no banners, no warning. And Bryce? Rylan asked. He comes with us, Alistair said, a cruel smile touching his lips, as our honored guest. I want him to see his house of cards fall with his own eyes. Alara stood. I'm coming too. No, the refusal was absolute from both Alistair and Maeve simultaneously. You need me, Alara insisted, her own determination a cool counterpoint to their heat. If there are Omegas trapped there, terrified, they won't trust armed guards bursting in. They might trust another Omega. I can calm them, guide them out. My gift can sense for hidden dangers, for traps. I am not a warrior to fight, but I can be a shield to protect. She looked directly at Alistair, speaking through the bond as much as with words. You cannot do this alone. Let me help. Let me do this for my people. The struggle on his face was palpable. The fear for her was a physical pain in his chest, echoed in hers. But he also felt the rightness of her argument, the strategic advantage she offered. He saw not a fragile girl to protect, but a partner with a unique weapon. She will be with me, Maeve said, breaking the stalemate. Every moment, and we stay at the periphery, but she is right, Alistair. Her presence could save lives. With a ragged exhale, Alistair nodded. You stay with Maeve, you do exactly as she says. At the first sign of real danger, you are taken away. That is not negotiable. Alara agreed, her heart pounding with fear and a fierce, righteous anticipation. The ride to the northern Weald was a grim, silent affair. Lord Bryce, invited to join the king's hunting party, sat stiffly on his horse, his face a mask of sour disapproval that grew paler with every mile that brought them closer to his lands. He knew. They left the horses a mile from the coordinates the dying forester had given. The royal guard melted into the towering pines like ghosts. Alistair, Rylan, Alara, and Maeve moved more slowly, Bryce forced to walk before them, his hands bound loosely behind his back. The entrance to the mine was hidden brilliantly, a false rock face that swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a dark, damp tunnel leading down. The air that wafted out carried the scent of damp earth, crushed stone, and despair. Alara's senses were overwhelmed. The misery was a thick, choking fog. Whispers of pain, of exhaustion, of broken hope. She clutched Maeve's arm, steadying herself. Alistair gave a signal. Guards flooded into the tunnel. What they found was a vision from a nightmare, a cavern lit by flickering, foul-smelling torches. Dozens of Omega men and women, faces gaunt and gray with rock dust, moved like automatons, chipping at veins of glittering blue-white stone with crude tools. Silver-laced collars gleamed at their throats, suppressing their wolves, their will. Brutish overseers, armed with shock rods, patrolled the walkways. At the sight of the king's guards, chaos erupted. Overseers shouted, reaching for weapons. The enslaved Omegas cowered, too broken even to hope for rescue. Then Alara stepped forward, past Alistair's restraining arm. She closed her eyes, found the comm center Maeve had taught her, and opened herself up. She didn't project command, she projected safety, a wave of pure, calming assurance woven with the unmistakable royal authority of a Silvermane. "You are free," she spoke, her voice echoing softly in the cavern, carrying an unnatural clarity. "The king is here, no one will harm you again." "Look at me." Dozens of pairs of hopeless eyes turned toward her. They saw a young Omega in a travel-stained cloak, her face clean, her eyes glowing with a gentle green light. They felt her power not as a threat but as a shelter. One by one, they dropped their tools. The fear in the cavern didn't vanish, but it shifted, making room for a fragile, dawning belief. While the guards swiftly and ruthlessly subdued the overseers, Alara and Maeve moved among the slaves, Maeve using her healer's tools to remove the cruel collars, Alara using her voice and her aura to soothe their terror, to guide them toward the tunnel to the surface. Alistair watched her, his own battle forgotten for a moment. She moved with a gentle, unwavering grace, a lighthouse in a sea of suffering. This was her power, not to break but to mend, not to command obedience but to inspire trust. His gaze then found Bry's. The Lord was staring at the scene, his face ashen, the last of his bluster gone. He was looking at the face of his own damnation. "This is your legacy, Bry's," Alistair said, his voice cold enough to freeze the blood. "Not timber, not honor, this. You are not a lord of Valdoria, you are a slaver, and you will answer for it." As the last Omega was led from the cavern, a guard approached Alistair, holding a ledger much finer than the ones in the mine office. "Found in a locked chest, my king. It lists shipments, buyers, and members of the circle." The unraveling was complete. The thread pulled in the square had led them to the rotten heart. The shadowed circle was exposed. Bry's was broken. But as Alara emerged into the sunlight, helping a trembling young Omega woman blink against the light of a freedom she had forgotten, she felt no triumph. Only a deep, weary sorrow and a hardening resolve. They had won a battle. But the war for the soul of Valdoria, she now understood, was fought not just against villains in mines, but against the darkness that allowed such places to exist in the first place. And that war was just beginning. Chapter 12, The Fractured Circle and the Forged Vow. The return to Silverhold was a funeral procession for the old order. Lord Bry's, bound and gagged in a supply wagon, was a spectacle of fallen pride. The freed Omegas from the mine, wrapped in borrowed cloaks, walked in a dazed silence, their steps unsure on the open road. The royal guard marched with grim satisfaction, the captured overseers and the damning ledger from the mine secured under heavy lock. But in the lead carriage, the atmosphere was tense, focused. Alistair, Alara, Maeve, and Captain Rylan poured over the ledger by the shaky light of a lantern. The pages were a map of corruption, detailing not just Moonstone shipments and their buyers in distant city-states, but also lists of payments with code names. The stag, the owl, the hound, and next to them real names. Names that made Rylan curse under his breath and Alistair's jaw clench. Lady Cora's second cousin, a prominent wool merchant, the master of the royal kennels, a respected elder from the Western Plains pack. The shadowed circle was not a fringe group of disgruntled nobles, it was a cancer that had reached into the marrow of Valdoria's society. "We must move immediately," Rylan urged, his hand on his sword hilt. "Arrest them all before word spreads from the Weald." "No," Alistair said, his voice low. He was staring at a particular entry, his face pale. "Look, the Falcon, quarterly stipend, for information on royal movements, guard rotations." He looked up, his storm-gray eyes haunted. "The Falcon is Captain Davorin, commander of the Eastern March. He fought beside my father, he stood with me at my coronation." A sickening realization settled over them. The circle had eyes in the military. A mass arrest risked triggering a mutiny or a panicked, violent purge that could tear the kingdom apart in a civil war. "We need to fracture them," Alara said quietly. All eyes turned to her. She had been mostly silent, absorbing the horror of the names. We can't fight them as a united front, we have to turn them against each other. Make them see that the circle is not a shield but a sinking ship. How? Maeve asked, intrigued. Alara pointed to the ledger. They are paid. This is a business arrangement for many of them, not an ideology. Greed and fear are their motivators. So we offer a better deal and we make them fear each other more than they fear us. A plan, delicate and dangerous, was forged in the rattling carriage. It relied on secrecy, precision, and Alara's unique gifts. 2 nights later, under a moonless sky, 2 separate operations commenced. The first was led by Rylan. Using a list of lower-level members, the guards, the merchants, the minor functionaries, his teams moved like shadows. They did not make arrests, instead they delivered messages. A sealed scroll left on a bedside table, a whispered word in a dark alley. The message was always the same, and it came from the key, a new, anonymous tag they had created for Alara. Your name is known, your debts to the circle are recorded. The king offers clemency in exchange for your sworn testimony and immediate withdrawal. You have until the next moon to present yourself at the Sun Tower Gate under a flag of truce and renounce the circle. After that, the king's justice will find you. The circle cannot protect you, we have their ledger. It was a gamble. It relied on the human instincts of self-preservation and betrayal. The second operation was Alara's. Dressed in a dark hooded cloak, she stood with Maeve in a small, windowless chamber deep in the castle. Before her, on a simple table, lay objects taken from the personal chambers of the higher-level circle members: Lord Bryce's signet ring, a silk handkerchief belonging to Lady Cora's cousin, a whetstone from the kennel master. Maeve called it sympathetic resonance. Focus on the object, Maeve instructed, her voice a hypnotic murmur. Feel the echo of its owner, their ambition, their fear, their secrets. Then send a thought, not a shout, a whisper, a seed of doubt. Alara placed her hands on Bryce's cold signet ring. She breathed in, pushing past the clammy fear and greed that clung to it, searching for the core of his connection to the others. She found it, a memory of a secret meeting, of faces around a fire. She focused on the emotion binding them, not loyalty, but a shared predatory opportunism. Into that feeling she pushed a single, clear notion, imbued with her royal authority. Bryce has talked, he blames you, he is trading names for his life. She repeated the process with each object, tailoring the whispered fear. To the merchant, she implied his business partners were cutting him out. To the soldier, she suggested his comrades were plotting to let him take the fall alone. It was the most draining thing she had ever done. When she finished, she was drenched in cold sweat, her legs shaking. Maeve guided her to a chair, pressing a revitalizing tonic to her lips. It is done, the seeds are planted, now we see what grows in the dark. The next week was a silent, nerve-shredding wait. The castle was on high alert, but the expected counterattack never came. Instead, a different kind of siege began. On the third morning, a low-ranking tax collector appeared at the Sun Tower Gate, trembling, the scroll clutched in his hand. He babbled about coercion, about threats to his family, and named 2 other minor officials. The day after, a guard from the city watch came, confirming the kennel master's involvement and revealing a hidden cache of illegal poisons. The circle was cracking. The promise of clemency and the corrosive fear Alara had sown were doing their work. The key's messages had turned the circle's greatest strength, its secrecy, into its greatest weakness. No one knew who was about to talk, so everyone suspected everyone else. Then, the breakthrough. Lady Cora herself requested a private audience with Alistair and Alara. In the king's solar, the usually unflappable trade minister looked shaken. My cousin is a fool, Cora stated without preamble, her voice tight, greedy and short-sighted. I knew he dabbled in grey market goods, but I did not know of the mine or the circle. She placed a small journal on the table. He fled last night, left this behind. It contains meeting locations, past and planned, and a name, the one they call the Architect. The true leader of the circle, who not even Bryce or Sela's ever met in the light. Alistair took the journal, his fingers tightening on the cover. Who? Cora met his gaze, her own filled with a cold fury. Eldred, the lorekeeper. The name dropped like a stone. Eldred was not a noble or a warrior. He was the ancient, revered keeper of the pack's oral histories and legal precedents. A man who spent his days in the archives, a gentle, stooped figure everyone overlooked. The perfect puppet master. He provided the legal justifications for Sela's debts, Cora spat. He found the historical loopholes for Bryce's land claims. He shaped the narrative, turning greed into tradition. He is the mind, the others were merely the hands. The final piece. The architect of the rot was not a snarling monster but a quiet scholar who had weaponized history itself. That night, Alastair stood on the battlements with Alara. The wind was cold, carrying the first scent of true spring. Below, Silverhold was quiet, but it was the quiet of a wound beginning to close, not the quiet of fear. "It's almost over," Alastair said, his voice rough with exhaustion and relief. "With Eldred we can uproot it entirely." Alara nodded, watching the stars. The bond between them was quiet now, a steady, strong connection no longer frayed by lies but strengthened by shared purpose and hard-won trust. "And then?" she asked softly. "And then we build," he said, turning to her. In the starlight his face was open, vulnerable, the real work. Not just tearing down the bad but building the good, together. He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. His hand covered hers where it rested on the cold stone. "I know I do not deserve to ask this, not after how we began. But the bond, it is not just a pull for me anymore, Alara. It is a choice. You are my choice every day, as my advisor, my conscience, and I hope one day as my queen." He wasn't commanding, he wasn't begging, he was stating a hope laid bare. Alara looked down at their joined hands. She thought of the beggar's grateful eyes, the king's protective fury, the man's weary determination to do better. She thought of the freed Omegas blinking in the sunlight, of Kieran's proud smile in the archives, of the feeling of using her gift not as a weapon but as a shelter. The hurt was still there, a faded scar, but it was no longer a wall. It was a reminder of a truth learned the hard way. She turned her hand under his, lacing their fingers together. The connection sparked, warm and right. She didn't speak, she didn't need to. The bond sang with her answer, a hesitant, hopeful, resounding yes that was not yet about crowns or titles, but about partnership, about a shared vow forged in fire and secrecy to heal the broken kingdom they both loved. Below them in the dark streets, the last agents of the shadowed circle were being rounded up. Above them, the first stars of a new season shone clear and bright. The long night of Valdoria was ending. And a new day, built on a foundation of truth and a bond tempered by trial, was about to dawn. Chapter 13, The Architect's Gambit. The revelation of Eldred as the architect was a blow that struck at the kingdom's cultural soul. The lorekeeper was not just a man, he was a living archive, the gentle voice that had told generations of pups their history. His betrayal felt like a poisoning of the wellspring. The arrest had to be perfect. He was old, frail, and never left the Hall of Annals, a labyrinthine library attached to the Great Hall. A public spectacle would shatter the fragile trust they were rebuilding. It had to be quiet, undeniable, and followed by swift, transparent justice. They planned it for the deep night when the castle slept. Alastair, Rylan, and a select team would enter the hall. Alara insisted on coming. "He deals in stories and secrets," she argued. "My gift can sense deception better than anyone. He may have traps laid that aren't made of steel." Alastair agreed, reluctantly. The bond hummed with his protective anxiety but also with respect for her logic. The Hall of Annals was a cavern of shadows and whispered paper. Towering shelves swallowed the light from their shielded lanterns. The air smelled of dust, old leather, and something else, a dry, bitter scent like forgotten herbs. Eldred's private scriptorium was at the very back. They found him there, as expected. He sat at a massive oak desk, illuminated by a single candle, a thick vellum book open before him. He looked up as they entered, his watery blue eyes magnified by thick lenses. He didn't seem surprised, he looked weary. "King Alastair," he said, his voice a papery rustle, "and the Silvermane girl, I wondered when you would come." He closed his book with a soft thud. "I assume Bryce sang a regrettably loud song." "The ledger named you Eldred," Alastair said, his voice hard. "The architect, you built the framework of their cruelty." "I built stability," Eldred corrected gently, as if explaining a difficult text to a child. "Your father's reign was chaos held together by fear. When he died, the packs were a collection of shattered glass. Sila's, Bry's, the others, they were the strong hands that could piece it back together. They needed a system. I provided the mortar, the laws, the precedents, the justifications." He said the last word without shame, as a simple fact of engineering. "Mortar made of lies and blood," Alara spoke, her voice cutting through the dusty air. She could feel it now, the unique texture of his mind, not the cold void of Bry's, but a vast, arid landscape of intellectual arrogance, completely divorced from empathy. He saw people as pieces on a board, their suffering a minor logistical problem. Eldred's gaze shifted to her, a spark of genuine interest in his eyes. Ah, the returned bloodline, a fascinating variable. I calculated a 60% chance Silas would break you before you manifested. I underestimated your resilience. Or perhaps, he said, peering at her, overestimated the nourishing qualities of gruel. The casual cruelty of it took Alara's breath away. This man had consigned her to starvation as a statistical probability. You're under arrest for treason, conspiracy, and enslavement, Rylan growled, stepping forward. Of course, Eldred sighed, standing slowly. But before you drag an old man to a dank cell, would you indulge a scholar's final curiosity? He didn't wait for an answer. He gestured to the book on his desk. This is the true history, not the pretty tales for the pups. The uncensored chronicles of every hard choice, every necessary evil that built and maintained Valdoria. The circle was merely the latest instrument. You dismantle it, you remove a tool, but the need remains, the need for strong hands to make hard choices for the weak, you will see. He was trying to plant a seed of doubt to justify his evil as historical inevitability. Alara felt the slick, intellectual poison in his words, but she also felt something else, a strange focus in him, not on them but on the shelves behind his desk, a flicker of anticipation. Take him, Alistair commanded, his patience gone. As Rylan moved, Eldred's hand, surprisingly swift, darted to the candle on his desk. Instead of snuffing it, he tipped it over onto the open book. The ancient, dry pages caught instantly, flames leaping up with a hungry roar. No. Alistair shouted, lunging for the book, but the fire was a distraction. Eldred's other hand had pulled a hidden lever under his desk. With a grinding of ancient gears, a section of the bookcase behind him swung inward, revealing a dark passage. The real archives are elsewhere. Eldred cackled, a shocking, ugly sound from the gentle scholar. The proof of every king's complicity. You want truth, boy king, it's in there, but hurry, the fire spreads. He turned to scramble into the passage. Rylan was blocked by the sudden wall of flame now dancing across the desk, igniting tapestries. Alistair was closer, but the heat was intense. Alara acted. She didn't think of command or calming, she thought of air, of suffocation. Focusing on the burning desk, she pushed a wave of force, not of power, but of negation. It was like throwing a mental blanket over the flames. The fire didn't go out, but it guttered and shrank back, confused, starved of its ferocious spirit for a crucial few seconds. It was enough. Alistair vaulted the smoldering desk, his cloak smoking, and tackled Eldred at the mouth of the secret passage. They fell in a heap just inside the darkness. Rylan and guards beat out the remaining flames on the tapestries. The precious, poisonous book was a blackened ruin. Alara rushed to the passage entrance. Alistair was hauling a struggling, spitting Eldred to his feet, but her eyes were drawn past them into the darkness. The passage led down, deep into the bedrock beneath the castle, and from it she felt a pull, not from the bond. From her blood, a deep, resonant hum of ancient power, of preserved truth. Eldred hadn't been bluffing, something of immense power and history was down there. The passage, she breathed. Alistair looked from Eldred's triumphant, snarling face to the dark stairway. He wants us to follow, it's a trap. Of course it's a trap, Eldred wheezed, his glasses askew. But is it a trap you can afford not to spring? What if the next Silas finds this place before you do? What secrets does it hold that could unmake your pretty new world? It was a masterful play. Even in capture, Eldred was manipulating them, forcing a choice between caution and the hunger for ultimate truth. Alistair met Alara's eyes. The bond conveyed the conflict, the tactical danger versus the historical necessity. The king needed to know what weapons the past held against his future. Rylan, secure him in the iron cell, post 4 guards, Alistair ordered. He then turned to Alara. We go down, but carefully, and we are tied together. He took a length of rope from a guard's pack, tying one end around his waist and offering the other to her. If this is a trap, we face it linked. The symbolism wasn't lost on her, linked as they had become. They took a lantern and descended, leaving the smell of smoke and betrayal behind. The stairs were narrow, hewn from the living rock. The air grew cold and still. The hum grew stronger, vibrating in Alara's teeth. It felt old, older than the castle, older than the United Pacts. The stairs ended in a small, circular chamber, and in the center, on a stone pedestal, lay the source of the power. It was not a book. It was a crown, but not a king's crown. It was woven of silver and moonstone, delicate yet radiating immense, gentle authority. The Omega circlet, the lost symbol of the Silvermane line said to be destroyed centuries ago. Here it lay, hidden by kings and lorekeepers who feared its power, the power to legitimize an Omega's voice as equal to an Alpha's in matters of law and heart. Next to it lay a simple stone tablet covered in carved runes. Elara approached, her hand trembling. She didn't need to read them, her blood understood. It was the original covenant of the Pax, the true one, before it was edited by generations of alphas. It spoke of balance, of alpha strength partnered with omega wisdom, of rule as a shared burden, not a solitary right. Eldred's trap wasn't a pit or a monster, it was truth. A truth so powerful it could destabilize everything Alistair was trying to build if revealed recklessly, but a truth that could also be the final, perfect foundation for the new Valdoria. Elara reached out, her fingers hovering over the cool silver of the circlet. It pulsed, recognizing her blood. A vision flashed behind her eyes, not of power but of responsibility, of standing not behind a throne but beside it, of a kingdom healed from the inside out. She pulled her hand back, looking at Alistair. His face in the lantern light was full of awe, not fear. He understood what this meant. The architect's final gambit, Alistair murmured. To give us the tool that could either complete our work or break us apart under the weight of its implications. Elara looked from the ancient circlet to the man bound to her by rope and by a bond stronger than stone. The path forward was clear and more terrifying than any battle. The fight against the shadowed circle was over. Now they had to decide what to do with the light they had found in the darkness. The choice was no longer about survival, but about legacy. And it was a choice they had to make together. Chapter 14, The Weight of the Crown and the Promise of Dawn. They emerged from the subterranean chamber changed. The air in the Hall of Annals, still acrid with the smell of charred lies, felt thin and insubstantial compared to the profound silence of the vault below. Alistair carried the stone tablet, wrapped in cloth. Elara carried the Omega circlet, not touching it with her skin, its cool weight in a velvet pouch feeling heavier than any burden of laundry or debt. They did not speak as they ascended to the Sun Tower. Words were too small for what they had discovered. The bond between them hummed with a new, solemn frequency, a shared awe at the responsibility now resting in their hands. In the tower's main room, with only Maeve and a pale, anxious Kieran as witnesses, they laid their discoveries on the table. The simple stone tablet with its ancient runes. The exquisite moonstone-woven circlet that seemed to drink in the firelight and glow with a soft, internal luminescence. Maeve gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The Silvermane diadem, the true covenant, the stories were true, they hid them, they hid it all. Kieran reached out a trembling finger toward the runes. This says the Omega voice is sovereign in matters of kinship, justice, and healing, that no pack law is valid without the consent of both Alpha and Omega councils. He looked up, his eyes wide. This changes everything. Everything we've ever been told. That is why it was hidden, Alistair said, his voice gravelly with fatigue and revelation. For generations, my ancestors, Eldred's predecessors, they edited history to consolidate power. They made the Alpha's word absolute. They turned partnership into subjugation. He looked at Elara, his storm-gray eyes shadowed with a king's guilt for crimes he hadn't committed but had inherited. The rot Eldred exploited, it was planted in the very foundation. Elara stared at the circlet. It was a symbol of everything she could have been, everything her people had lost, a key to a door long ago walled up. What do we do with it? She whispered. If we reveal this, it will shatter the Pack's understanding of itself. It could cause panic, a crisis of faith. The noble families who just lost the circle will cling to the old ways harder than ever. And if we hide it, Alistair countered, we become like them, guardians of a comfortable lie. Our new foundation would be built on the same buried fault line. He paced, the weight of kingship pressing down. Eldred knew this. His final trap wasn't to kill us but to force an impossible choice. Reveal the truth and risk chaos, bury it and live a lie. There is a third path, Maeve said, her old voice firm. She looked at Elara. You do not wield this as a weapon to smash the old world. You embody it as a promise to build the new one. You do not announce a revolution. You demonstrate a restoration. Elara understood. It wasn't about proclaiming ancient rights from the battlements. It was about living them, slowly, steadily, letting the truth seep into the kingdom's foundations through action, not decree. The coronation, Kieran said suddenly. Everyone looked at him. He blushed but held his ground. The king's coronation was after his father's death, a wartime ceremony. It was about strength, not unity. What if there was a new ceremony, a reaffirmation, not just of the king but of the kingdom's true covenant, with the Omega circlet present, a symbol, not a demand? The idea hung in the air, brilliant and dangerous, a public, peaceful reintroduction of the old balance. Alastair stopped pacing. He looked at Alara not as a king to an advisor but as one soul to another bound by fate and choice. "Will you stand with me?" He asked, the question encompassing so much more than a ceremony. "Not behind me, beside me, with the weight of your bloodline and the truth of this covenant between us, it will make you a target forever. It will tie your fate to mine and mine to yours in a way even the bond cannot." Alara looked from his earnest, worried face to the gentle glow of the circlet. She thought of the Omegas in the mine, of Myra clutching her deed, of the pregnant woman in the stocks. She thought of a beggar accepting half a loaf of bread. This was the path that began in that stable. Not to be a queen in a palace, but to be a voice for the voiceless, to use the power she never wanted to heal the kingdom she loved. The hurt was still there, but it had been transformed. It was no longer a wound from his deception, but a scar that reminded her of the cost of truth and the value of the hard-earned trust that had grown since. She reached out, not for the circlet, but for his hand. Her fingers slid into his and the bond sang, clear and strong. "I will stand with you," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word, "not for a crown, but for the covenant, for Valdoria." The decision was made. The following days were a whirlwind of secret preparations. Maeve and Kieran pored over the true covenant, drafting a new, inclusive oath of rule. The finest goldsmiths and historians, sworn to secrecy, studied the circlet to create a complementary piece, a new alpha's torque, not of domination but of stewardship, designed to symbolically interlock with the Omega circlet. Word went out across the realm, not of a threat or a punishment, but of a reaffirmation ceremony, a gathering to mark the end of a dark time and the dedication to a new, brighter future. Curiosity and hope brought representatives from every pack, every district. The night before the ceremony, Alara stood on the tower balcony, the circlet now cool against her brow as she practiced wearing it. It felt strange but not foreign, it felt like remembering. Alastair found her there. He wore simple clothes, the new torque resting on a cushion in his room, waiting for dawn. "Nervous?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "Terrified," she admitted, a small smile touching her lips. They could reject it, they could see it as a weakness. Or, he said, his shoulder brushing hers, they could see it for what it is. The greatest strength a pack can have, unity, not uniformity, unity. He was quiet for a moment. "When I was Thuron and you gave me that bread, you showed me a kindness that had nothing to do with power. That is what we offer them tomorrow, not a new hierarchy, but a return to an old, forgotten kindness, a balance." He turned to her, taking both her hands. The moonlight caught the silver in her circlet and the determined gleam in his eyes. "No matter what happens tomorrow, Alara, thank you, for the bread, for your courage. For choosing to see the man behind the crown and the king behind the beggar." He leaned forward and pressed his forehead gently against hers, a gesture of profound respect and shared purpose. It was more intimate than a kiss, a silent vow exchanged in the quiet night. The bond between them settled into a deep, unshakable calm. The storm of discovery was over. The work of building was about to begin. As the first hint of pink touched the eastern sky, Alara knew. This was no longer about a key or a lock, a beggar or a king. It was about two wolves standing together, ready to face the dawn of a new age for their people. The shadows of the past had been dragged into the light. Now they would plant seeds in the cleared earth and watch what grew. Chapter 15. The reaffirmation and the roots of tomorrow. Dawn on the day of the reaffirmation broke not with fanfare, but with a profound, expectant hush. The sky was a clear, pale gold, promising a day of gentle light. The great courtyard of Silverhold, which had witnessed fear, betrayal, and violence, was transformed. No executioner's block, no tax lines. Instead, garlands of early spring blossoms, snowdrops, crocuses, and forsythia wound around the pillars. The air smelled of damp earth and hope. The entire pack, it seemed, had come. They filled every space, a sea of faces ranging from the richly dressed nobles, wary and curious, to the common folk in patched wool, their expressions etched with cautious optimism. The freed Omegas from the mine stood together, clean and dressed in new clothes, a living testament to the change. Myra held her child on her hip, her face serene. Kieran stood with the archivists, his posture straight with pride. At the front, on a low, wide platform, stood a simple stone plinth. Upon it lay two objects covered in cloth. A horn sounded, clear and pure. The massive doors of the great hall opened. King Alastair emerged first. He did not wear his battle armor or his forbidding royal robes. He was clad in a tunic of deep blue, the color of the twilight sky, over practical trousers and boots. He looked like a ruler ready to work, not just to reign. His dark hair was tied back, his storm-gray eyes scanning the crowd, not with dominance but with connection. And then Alara stepped out beside him. A murmur like wind through grass swept the courtyard. She wore a gown the color of new leaves, simple in cut but elegant. Her chestnut hair was braided with silver thread, and upon her brow rested the Omega circlet. It caught the morning sun and seemed to hold it, glowing with a soft, steady light that was neither aggressive nor frail. It was simply present, authoritative. She walked with her head high, her forest-green eyes calm, projecting the serene assurance she had mastered. She was not following the king, she was walking with him step for step. Together they ascended the platform and stood before the plinth. The silence was absolute, strained with the weight of history. Alastair spoke first, his voice carrying to the farthest corners without need for shouting. "People of Valdoria, we gather today not to crown a king, for I am already your king. We gather not to conquer, for the greatest enemy was within our own walls." He paused, his gaze touching on the freed Omegas, on the hopeful faces in the crowd. "We gather to reaffirm, to remember who we are and who we promise to be to one another." He reached out and pulled the cloth from the first object on the plinth. It was the new Alpha's torque, a band of dark, polished iron inlaid with a single, unbroken line of silver. It was strong but not ostentatious, a symbol of duty, not dominance. "For too long," Alastair continued, "the Alpha's strength has been seen as a chain to bind, rather than a shield to protect. That ends today." He lifted the torque and placed it around his own neck. It settled against his collarbones, a simple, powerful statement. Then he turned to Alara. His expression was one of profound respect and something more, a partnership forged in fire. A shield alone is a wall, it can protect but it cannot nurture, it cannot heal or guide or see the cracks in its own foundation. For that, a pack needs wisdom, it needs compassion, it needs the heart that remembers every member, not just the strongest. He gestured to the second, still-veiled object. "Long ago our founders understood this, they forged a covenant of balance. Alpha strength partnered with Omega wisdom. That covenant was hidden, its symbol lost, its truth twisted into a lie of subjugation." He looked at the crowd, his voice gaining passionate strength. "But lies cannot survive the light, and truth has a way of returning." With a flourish he pulled the second cloth away, revealing the stone tablet of the true covenant. Gasps rippled through those close enough to see the ancient runes. "This," Alastair declared, "is our true foundation." "And this," he said, turning fully to Alara, his hand indicating the circlet on her brow, "is its living symbol, not to rule over but to advise, not to command obedience but to champion justice. Not to stand in shadow but to help bear the weight of the crown so that its burden does not corrupt." He extended his hand to her, palm up, an invitation, not a command. "Alara Silvermane, daughter of the true line, will you reaffirm this ancient covenant with me? Will you lend your wisdom, your courage, and your compassion to the rule of this kingdom? Will you stand as Omega voice to my Alpha shield, so that together we may lead Valdoria not back to a forgotten past, but forward to a future worthy of all its people?" Every eye was on Alara. She could feel the hope, the skepticism, the awe, the fear, a torrent of emotion from the crowd. She could feel Alastair's steady, unwavering faith through the bond. She took a deep breath, the scent of blossoms and packed earth filling her lungs. She did not take his hand, instead she turned to face the crowd directly, the circlet glowing softly. When she spoke, her voice was clear as a bell, carrying the same gentle authority she had used in the mine. "I am Alara," she began. "I have washed your clothes in an icy stream, I have scrubbed your stables, I have known hunger and debt and fear." She saw heads nod in the crowd, saw recognition in the eyes of the common folk. "I have also known kindness. From a brother who never gave up hope, from an old healer who saw more in me than I saw in myself." She glanced at Maeve, who gave a small, proud smile. "And I knew a beggar," she continued, her gaze sweeping back to Alastair. "A man with nothing, to whom I gave half a loaf of bread because it was the right thing to do. That man was your king, and that act, that simple choice to see a person in need, is the heart of this covenant." She turned back to the people, her voice strengthening. "It is not about a circlet or a torque, it is about remembering that a pack is a family, that the strong have a duty to lift the weak and the wise have a duty to guide the strong. That every voice from the highest lord to the smallest child has value." She looked at the noble section, meeting the eyes of those who had benefited from the old ways. This new path will ask something of everyone. It will ask the strong to share power. It will ask the wise to speak truth. It will ask all of us to choose compassion over convenience. She finally turned and placed her hand in Alistair's, their fingers laced together, a tangible symbol of the bond that united them. The circlet and the torque seemed to resonate, a faint, harmonious hum felt more than heard. "I do not stand here as your queen," Alara said, her final words ringing out. "I stand here as your Omega voice, as a promise. A promise that never again will an Omega starve in the shadows of this castle. A promise that every wolf, whether their strength is in tooth or claw or mind or heart, has a place in Valdoria. I reaffirm this covenant for my brother, for all of you. And for the future we will build together." For a moment there was utter silence. Then it began, not with a noble's cheer but with a soft, swelling sound from the back of the crowd. It was the freed Omegas humming a low, ancient harmony of affirmation. It was picked up by the common folk, a wave of sound that was not loud, but was deep, resonant, and filled with a relief so profound it was like a collective exhalation. Then the cheering began, true, joyous, hopeful cheering that shook the garlands on the pillars. Alistair and Alara stood hand in hand, facing their people, the morning sun bathing them both in golden light. The shadows of the circle of Seelas of Eldred were gone, burned away by the dawn of this new day. Later, as the celebration spilled into the streets with feasting and music, Alara and Alistair stole a moment alone on a quiet balcony overlooking the rejuvenated city. "You were magnificent," he said, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "We were," she corrected, smiling up at him. The circlet felt light now, a part of her. The bond was a quiet, deep river of shared purpose and contentment. He looked out over Silverhold at the smoke from festive fires curling into the clear sky, at the children already playing in the square where so recently there had been only fear. "It will be hard work," he said. "There will be setbacks. The old prejudices have deep roots." "Then we dig them out," Alara said simply, "one by one, together." He pulled her gently to him and she rested her head against his shoulder, the cool silver of her circlet touching his cheek. They stood in silence, watching their kingdom awaken. The story that began with a king disguised as a beggar and an Omega sharing her last meal did not end with a fairy tale kiss or a simple victory. It ended with a choice, reaffirmed before an entire people. A choice to lead with both strength and heart. A choice to heal. The reign of King Alistair and Omega voice Alara had begun. Their legacy would not be written in the annals of conquest, but in the quiet, steady growth of justice, in the rebuilding of trust, and in the simple, enduring truth that a pack is strongest not when its alpha stands tallest, but when every wolf from the mightiest to the most humble stands together, rooted in the covenant of a shared dawn.